Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we plunge into the uncomfortable, often horrifying truth of slavery under the Islamic Caliphates. Imagine, if you will, the soft glow of your bedside lamp, casting long shadows across your room, a stark contrast to the unforgiving desert sun you're about to feel on your skin. You're lying there, perhaps a gentle breeze from an open window stirring the curtains, utterly safe. Now try to picture that safety being ripped away, replaced by the clanking of chains, the harsh shouts of strangers, and the terrifying realization that your life, as you know it, has just evaporated. Tonight, we're not just talking about history, we're stepping into it, feeling the grit under our fingernails, hearing the desperate cries. You probably won't survive this journey unscathed, at least not emotionally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a market, or perhaps just outside your village, going about your daily life. The air is warm, perhaps heavy with the scent of cooking fires or the dust of the road. Suddenly, chaos erupts. There are shouts, the thud of hooves, and before you can even register what's happening, you're seized. Rough hands bind your wrists, pulling them painfully behind your back. Your world tilts, spins, and then crashes into a brutal new reality. This isn't just a story. This is how countless individuals found themselves thrust into the horrifying maw of slavery within the burgeoning Islamic Caliphates. The initial moments of capture were often swift and brutal, a sudden, violent severing from everything familiar. You're not being asked, you're being taken. The concept of personal liberty, a notion we cling to so fiercely today, simply ceases to exist for you in that instant. Your captors are, in most cases, not necessarily driven by malice but by opportunity and the prevailing norms of the time. Raids, often called ghazwas, were a common method of acquiring captives, particularly in newly conquered territories or along the borders of the expanding Islamic Empire. Imagine the terror as your village is overrun, not by an invading army seeking conquest, but by raiders whose sole purpose is to seize human beings. You see your neighbours, your family, also being rounded up, their faces reflecting the same abject fear you feel. The air crackles with panic, punctuated by the sharp commands of your new masters. You're herded together, perhaps tied to others with a shared rope, each movement a painful reminder of your new status as chattel. As you begin your forced march, the first thing you notice is the unyielding pace. There's no time for rest, no pause for your aching muscles or protesting joints. Your feet, perhaps accustomed to soft earth or familiar village paths, are now chafed and blistered by rough terrain. The sun beats down mercilessly, and thirst becomes an immediate gnawing companion. You glance at the faces of your fellow captives, a mix of ages, genders, and backgrounds, all sharing the same dazed, terrified expression. Some weep openly, others simply stare blankly ahead, their minds already trying to process the enormity of their loss. You might try to speak, to ask questions, but your words are met with gruff commands to keep moving, sometimes accompanied by a sharp jab from a stick or the flat of a blade. The journey to the nearest collection point, often a newly established garrison town or a major city, is a test of endurance. You trudge onward, your body screaming with fatigue, your mind racing through the fragments of your former life. You recall the warmth of your home, the laughter of children, the mundane routines that suddenly seem like luxuries beyond imagining. This psychological torment, the sudden and complete loss of agency, is perhaps as devastating as the physical hardship. Historians still argue whether the initial shock or the subsequent journey was more lethal for newly enslaved populations. Many simply didn't survive these first few days or weeks, succumbing to exhaustion, dehydration, or despair. You learn quickly that defiance is met with swift, uncompromising violence. A misstep, a faltering pace, a murmured complaint, any deviation from silent compliance can result in a beating. You witness others being punished, their cries serving as a chilling lesson. Your senses are heightened, the smell of dust and sweat, the constant jingle of chains, the distant calls of unseen birds, all mingle with the ever-present throb of fear. The world, once a place of relative predictability, has become a dangerous, unpredictable landscape where your very existence depends on the whims of your captors. One mainstream historical fact about this initial phase is the sheer volume of people captured during the early Islamic conquests and subsequent raids. The expansion of the caliphate created a constant influx of enslaved individuals from diverse regions, including Byzantium, Persia, parts of Europe, and eventually vast swathes of Africa. This wasn't a trickle, it was a flood, transforming societies and economies. Imagine the sheer logistical challenge of moving thousands upon thousands of human beings across vast, often hostile territories. It required significant organisation and a ruthless efficiency. A quirky, perhaps grim tidbit from this period is the concept of a capture quota in certain raiding expeditions. Some accounts suggest that specific numbers of captives were expected to be brought back, turning human beings into a measurable commodity, like bales of wool or sacks of grain. It highlights the deeply ingrained commercial aspect of slavery from its very inception. This wasn't just about labour, it was about assets, about wealth to be acquired and traded. As days bleed into nights, you find yourself huddled with other captives, perhaps in a makeshift pen, the cold ground your bed. Sleep offers little respite, often interrupted by the restless movements of others or the distant cries of animals. Your thoughts are a jumble of regret, fear, and a desperate, illogical hope for rescue. You try to recall the faces of your loved ones to hold on to their images before they fade, but even that act feels like a betrayal of your present grim reality. You're no longer a person with a name and a past. You are merely a body, a unit of potential labour or property, being transported to an unknown future. The dehumanization begins not in the market, but the moment the chains clink around your wrists. The journey continues, mile after agonizing mile. You pass by other groups, some heading in the same direction, some diverging, a constant reminder of the vast interconnected network of human trafficking that underpinned much of the caliphate's early economic and social structure. You might glimpse a caravan of merchants, their goods piled high, a stark contrast to your own empty-handed, shackled procession. The sheer scale of this human movement is staggering, a silent, tragic testament to a world where human liberty was a fragile, easily extinguished flame. You realise, with a chilling certainty, that your fate is now entirely out of your hands. Your hopes, your dreams, your very identity have been stripped away. You're a commodity, a piece of property to be moved, assessed, and eventually sold. The world shrinks to the immediate discomfort of your bonds, the burning sun on your skin, and the relentless rhythm of your weary steps. This is the brutal inauguration into a new life, a life where you are no longer the master of your own destiny, but a pawn in a larger, crueler game. The initial shock of capture slowly gives way to a grinding, monotonous terror as you find yourself thrust onto one of the most infamous routes of human suffering, the trans-Saharan slave trade. You're no longer just moving, you're part of a vast, despairing river of humanity flowing across an unforgiving landscape. Imagine the sun, a relentless eye in the sky, beating down on you with an intensity that seems to suck the moisture from your very bones. The air shimmers above the sand, distorting the horizon into a wavy, mocking mirage. You can feel the heat radiating from the ground, scorching the soles of your feet even through the thin, inadequate coverings you might possess. Your lips are cracked, your throat parched, and every breath feels like inhaling dust. This journey is a test of sheer, brutal endurance. You're part of a caravan, but not one laden with spices or silks. Your cargo is human flesh, and the drivers are merciless. You walk and walk and walk, for days that blend into weeks, each one a carbon copy of the last. Endless sand, relentless sun, gnawing hunger, and an unquenchable thirst. The only sounds are the rhythmic shuffling of hundreds of feet, the occasional crack of a whip, and the low moans of those who can no longer keep up. You learn to conserve every drop of moisture, every ounce of energy. The small amount of water offered is never enough, tasting sometimes of stale leather or whatever vessel it was carried in. Food is scarce and unappetizing, just enough to prevent immediate collapse, but never enough to truly satisfy the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. You quickly become intimately familiar with the signs of struggle and death that mark this route. You see individuals falter, their legs giving out from beneath them. Their pleas for rest are met with indifference, or worse, violence. Those who fall and cannot rise are often left behind, a chillingly common occurrence. You avert your eyes, not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to preserve your own sanity, to avoid acknowledging that their fate could, and likely would, be yours if you falter. The desert becomes a vast unmarked graveyard, littered with the bones of those who simply could not endure. This silent testimony to the cruelty of the journey hangs heavy in the air, a constant reminder of your precarious existence. The nights offer little true respite, while the sun mercifully dips below the horizon, bringing a deceptive coolness. The ground beneath you remains hard and unforgiving. You huddle with others, seeking warmth from shared body heat. But sleep is fitful, haunted by the day's horrors and the anxieties of what tomorrow will bring. The vast, star-filled desert sky, so beautiful in its emptiness, only serves to emphasize your own smallness and utter helplessness in this desolate expanse. You might dream of home, of cool water, of familiar faces, only to wake with a jolt to the harsh reality of your chains and the knowledge that the relentless march will begin again with the first hint of dawn. One mainstream historical fact about the trans-Saharan slave trade is its immense scale and longevity. It persisted for over 1,000 years, from the 7th to the 20th century, moving millions of people from sub-Saharan Africa into North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. This wasn't a fleeting phenomenon. It was a deeply entrenched system that profoundly reshaped demographics and societies across vast geographical areas. Imagine the countless generations, the lost lineages, the shattered cultures, all swallowed by this relentless human pipeline. A quirky, or rather grimly fascinating tidbit is the use of certain animals, like camels, not just for transport, but sometimes as a chilling measure of survival. In extreme cases of thirst, accounts exist where camel blood was consumed as a desperate attempt to stave off dehydration, a testament to the brutal choices forced upon both captors and captives in the most severe conditions. It speaks volumes about the sheer desperation that permeated these journeys, where conventional morality, or even basic humanity, dissolved in the face of survival. You might witness sudden, violent sandstorms, immense walls of swirling dust that blot out the sun and sting your skin. These aren't just an inconvenience, they're a threat to life, disorienting and terrifying. You huddle together, trying to protect your face and lungs from the choking dust, feeling utterly vulnerable to the raw power of nature, which seems almost in league with your captors. When the storm passes, leaving everything coated in a fine gritty layer, the sense of weariness is even more profound. The diversity of the enslaved population on these routes is also striking. While many were from various sub-Saharan African groups, particularly from regions like West Africa and the Horn of Africa, the trade also included people from Eastern Europe, often referred to as Sakaliba, Central Asia, and even some areas of the Caucasus. This mix of ethnicities and cultures, forced together by a common tragedy, often led to the gradual erosion of individual identities, as distinct tribal or national affiliations became secondary to the shared experience of enslavement. You might find yourself marching alongside someone whose language you don't understand, but whose silent suffering mirrors your own. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates on the trans-Saharan routes were primarily due to the harsh environmental conditions or the deliberate cruelty of the slave traders. While the desert itself was a formidable foe, the lack of adequate food and water, the brutal pace, and the casual disregard for human life undoubtedly exacerbated the natural challenges, turning the journey into a deliberate attrition. Was it just the desert? Or was it the system designed to extract the most out of human bodies, even if it meant their demise? You recall that crocodile dung sunscreen, a strange, desperate memory from Section 1, a small, almost humorous detail in a sea of horror. Now, even such bizarre comforts seem like an impossible luxury. There is no relief, no escape from the elements. The sun bakes your skin, leaving it dry and cracked. Your eyes constantly squint against the glare, making everything seem hazy and unreal. You begin to observe the hierarchy among the captors. Some are more brutal than others, some merely indifferent. You learn to anticipate their moods, to recognize the subtle shifts in their voices that might signal a moment of relative calm or an impending outburst of violence. This constant state of hypervigilance is exhausting, a psychological burden as heavy as the physical one. You're always on edge, always prepared for the worst. As the journey progresses, your sense of self starts to fray at the edges. Your name, your family, your village. These memories become precious, fragile things you cling to, whispering them to yourself in the dark to ensure they don't vanish entirely. But the constant pressure, the endless suffering begins to chip away at your identity. You're becoming less of who you were and more of what they want you to be. A voiceless, compliant unit. The purpose of this brutal transit isn't just to move you geographically, but to break you mentally and spiritually, making you more amenable to your eventual fate. The diseases that sweep through these caravans are another silent killer. Dysentery, fever, and other ailments spread rapidly in the close confines and unsanitary conditions. You see people sicken, their bodies racked with chills or consumed by burning fevers. There's no medicine, no comfort, just the hope that you won't be next. The weak are simply left behind, their suffering cut short by the elements or predators. The caravan moves on, a relentless, unfeeling entity. You might hear whispers among the other captives, fragmented tales of home, of what was lost. Sometimes a shared glance, a small act of kindness, a hand offered to help someone up, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain becomes a lifeline. These fleeting moments of human connection are incredibly precious, tiny sparks of defiance against the crushing dehumanization. They are reminders that beneath the grime and despair, a human spirit still flickers. As you draw closer to the edges of the desert, a faint change in the air, a subtle shift in the landscape begins to offer a glimmer of what might be called hope, or at least a change of scenery. The sand might give way to more rocky terrain, or the distant silhouette of a settlement might appear on the horizon, but this isn't the hope of freedom. It's the grim anticipation of the next stage of your suffering, the slave markets, where you will cease to be merely a person on a march and become a product for sale. The journey across the desert has stripped you bare, physically and emotionally, preparing you for the ultimate degradation of being bought and sold like an animal. You've survived the elements, the hunger, the thirst, but what awaits you might be even more terrifying. You've survived the brutal march, the unforgiving desert, and the gnawing pangs of hunger and thirst. Now, the distant haze on the horizon resolves itself into the unmistakable silhouette of a city, a sprawling mass of buildings, minarets, and bustling activity. A strange, unsettling mix of relief and dread washes over you. You've reached a destination, but it's not one of freedom. Instead, you're led directly to the heart of urban commerce, a place where human beings are simply another commodity, the slave market. The sounds hit you first. A cacophony of voices, the braying of animals, the persistent hum of 1,000 transactions. The smells are overwhelming. Spices, sweat, dung, and something else. A faint metallic scent that you instinctively associate with fear. You're jostled, pushed, and prodded. Part of a new, larger group of captives funneling into a vast open square or a covered souk. The transition from the desolate silence of the desert to this vibrant yet terrifying marketplace is jarring, almost surreal. You find yourself in a designated area, perhaps an enclosed courtyard or a series of stalls. The ground beneath your feet is no longer sand but packed earth or rough cobblestones, still alien to your blistered feet. The chains might be removed from your ankles, but you're still bound by unseen shackles of fear and uncertainty. Here, you are no longer a person. You are an item for sale, a piece of property to be assessed, haggled over, and acquired. The sheer objectification is immediate and dehumanizing. Buyers mill about, their eyes scanning the groups of captives with an unnervingly detached air. They might be wealthy merchants, government officials, military commanders, or even ordinary households looking for domestic help. Their gazes sweep over you, dissecting your physique, evaluating your potential. You try to avoid their eyes, to make yourself invisible, but it's futile. You're on display. This public spectacle of human worthlessness is a psychological torment far beyond the physical exhaustion of the journey. You witness the various stages of inspection. Potential buyers approach, examining captives as one would a horse or a camel. They might check your teeth, feel your muscles, prod your limbs. Women are often subjected to far more intrusive examinations, designed to ascertain their health, fertility, and suitability for various roles, including concubinage. The shame, the utter degradation of this process burns deep. You are stripped of your dignity, your privacy, your very humanity, all in the service of a sale. You're expected to stand still, to comply with every command, no matter how humiliating. Any sign of defiance, any tear, any tremor of fear might be seen as a flaw, decreasing your value. The auction process itself is a blur of shouting and gesturing. You hear numbers being called out, a rapid-fire exchange of bids. Sometimes you're separated from others you've endured the journey with, their frightened faces the last you see of them. The finality of the hammerfall, or the handshake, signals the end of one terrifying chapter and the beginning of another, equally uncertain one. You're now somebody's property, completely at their mercy. One mainstream historical fact is that major Islamic cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, Cordoba, and later Timbuktu functioned as bustling centres for the slave trade, connecting vast networks across continents. These markets were highly organised, with established rules, brokers, and even specialist traders dealing in specific types of enslaved people. It wasn't a back-alley operation, it was a cornerstone of the economy. Imagine the sheer volume of human lives bought and sold in these places over centuries. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the practice of fattening houses in some regions, particularly for young women destined for harems or concubinage. Before being brought to market, some enslaved women were intentionally overfed to make them appear more plump and desirable, reflecting a specific aesthetic preference among buyers. It's a bizarre, unsettling detail that highlights the grotesque commodification of the human body and the lengths buyers would go to ensure they were getting a quality product. Historians still argue whether the active participation of Islamic scholars and jurists in legitimizing and regulating the slave trade contributed more to its widespread acceptance than purely economic factors. While the economic drivers were undeniable, the religious justifications and legal frameworks provided a powerful moral and social basis for the institution, making it incredibly difficult to dismantle. It wasn't just about money, it was woven into the very fabric of society and thought. You might hear whispers, fragments of conversations as you wait. Some buyers discuss sakaliba, the term used for enslaved people of European origin, valued for their fair skin and often for military service. Others speak of zanj, a term for East African enslaved people, often destined for hard agricultural labour. There's a cold, clinical classification of human beings based on origin, perceived strength, or physical attributes. This categorization further reinforces your sense of being reduced to a mere label, stripped of your unique identity. Remember that gentle sarcasm and ASMR cadence. It's hard to maintain when picturing the harsh reality of being prodded and inspected by strangers. The air in these markets is thick with unspoken fear, the low murmur of anticipation, and the desperate prayers of those on display. You recall the sheer physical exhaustion from the desert journey, but this emotional assault feels even more draining. Your spirit feels bruised, your will to resist slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of objectification. Sometimes, families are brought together, a rare blessing, but more often they are separated. You might witness a child being torn from their mother's arms, their desperate cries echoing in the crowded market. This is perhaps one of the most agonizing moments, watching the bonds of kinship forged in shared suffering being brutally severed by a coin toss or a handshake. The psychological trauma of such an event leaves indelible scars, a wound that never truly heals. You can only imagine the desperate struggle for a parent to comprehend their child being taken, or a child to understand why their parent is suddenly gone. The transaction complete, you are led away by your new owner. The immediate environment changes, but the fundamental reality of your enslavement does not. You might be led through crowded streets, feeling the curious stares of passers-by, a public declaration of your new status. You're no longer just a captive, you're a slave, defined by your owner's possession. The anonymity of the caravan is replaced by the specific, personal ownership of another human being. Your new owner might be kind, or they might be cruel. At this stage, you have no way of knowing. You are merely following orders, your body aching, your mind reeling from the transition. You might be given a new name, a common practice to further strip you of your previous identity and assimilate you into your new life. Your old name, your connection to your past, becomes a secret you guard fiercely, a small internal act of rebellion against total erasure. The slave market, for all its bustle and commerce, is a profound symbol of the dehumanization inherent in the institution. It is where human beings are transformed, legally and socially, from individuals with rights and families into property, assets to be used and discarded at will. The act of sale is not just a commercial transaction. It is a ritual of power, asserting absolute dominance over another human being. You feel this power weighing down on you, crushing your spirit. As you're led away, the sounds of the market begin to fade behind you, replaced by the unknown sounds of your new destination. Perhaps it's a grand house, perhaps a military barracks, perhaps a merchant's compound. The relief of no longer being on public display is quickly replaced by the anxiety of what specific forms your servitude will now take. The desert stripped your body, but the market stripped your soul. You're now ready for the next phase of your existence as a slave, a journey not of miles, but of servitude. Having survived the brutal journey and the dehumanizing spectacle of the market, you now find yourself in a new, unsettling environment. A private household. This isn't the grand, sweeping drama of a vast empire, but a more intimate, insidious form of control. You're no longer merely a unit in a caravan or an item on display. You're now a constant presence within someone else's domestic sphere. The chains might be off, but you quickly realize the walls of this home, however lavish, are just another kind of prison. This is household slavery, a pervasive form of servitude that was the backbone of daily life across the Islamic Caliphates, and it carries its own unique horrors. Your days begin before dawn, often with a jarring summons. You quickly learn the intricate routines of the house, each task demanding your immediate and unwavering attention. You might be grinding grain, kneading dough, sweeping courtyards, fetching water from a well, or tending to the needs of the family members. The work is relentless, physical, and often monotonous. There's no downtime, no true moments of privacy. Your body, already weary from the journey, is now subjected to a different kind of exhaustion. The constant low-level drain of endless chores and the psychological burden of perpetual alertness. You're always under observation, always expected to be performing. The nature of your abuse here isn't always overt physical violence, though that remains a constant threat, a looming shadow ready to descend for any perceived transgression. Instead, it's often a more subtle, insidious form of control, psychological manipulation and emotional torment. You're treated not as a person, but as a living tool, an extension of the household's needs. Your feelings, your opinions, your past, these are irrelevant. You learn to suppress your own desires, your own personality, adopting a mask of subservience. This constant emotional suppression is incredibly damaging, chipping away at your sense of self, making you feel increasingly hollow. You might be addressed not by your given name, but by a generic term like slave, or a new name arbitrarily assigned by your owners, further severing your ties to your former identity. This act, seemingly small, is a powerful tool of dehumanization. Your past, your family, your culture, they are systematically erased, replaced by the identity your owners wish to impose upon you. You cling to the memory of your true name, whispering it to yourself in the dead of night, a secret act of rebellion. One of the most pervasive abuses in household slavery is the lack of personal boundaries and privacy. You might share cramped sleeping quarters with other enslaved individuals, or even sleep on the floor of a common area, always within earshot or sight of your owners. There's no space to retreat, no corner to call your own. Your body, your time, your very presence are not your own. You exist to serve, and every aspect of your life is dictated by the rhythms and demands of the household. You quickly learn to navigate the complex social dynamics of the household. There might be a headwife, children, other relatives, and perhaps even other enslaved people who have been there longer and hold slightly higher positions in the domestic hierarchy. You learn to read faces, to anticipate moods, to understand unspoken commands. A wrong word, a lingering gaze, a moment of hesitation, any of these can invite severe punishment. You walk on eggshells, your nerves constantly frayed, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor residing deep within you. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread prevalence of household slavery across all levels of society in the Islamic world, from the grand palaces of caliphs to the modest homes of ordinary merchants. Enslaved individuals performed a vast array of domestic duties, acting as cooks, cleaners, nannies, attendants, scribes, and artisans. This wasn't a fringe practice, it was an integral part of the social and economic fabric, illustrating how deeply intertwined slavery was with daily life. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the occasional practice of owners gifting enslaved people to others, sometimes as a sign of generosity or a diplomatic gesture. Imagine being a human present, passed from one owner to another, your fate decided by the whims of your current master. You might find yourself suddenly transferred to an entirely new household, with new rules, new faces, and new anxieties, often with no warning or explanation. It reinforces the utter lack of agency you possess. Historians still argue whether the seemingly softer nature of domestic slavery, compared to brutal agricultural or military slavery, made it more psychologically damaging due to the constant intimate exposure to the owners. While physical brutality might have been less frequent for some, the perpetual psychological subjugation, the erosion of self-worth, and the lack of any private space could be equally, if not more, insidious and destructive to the human spirit. You're expected to be available at all times, day or night. If a child cries, you're there. If a guest arrives, you're there. If your owner has a sudden whim, you are there. There is no concept of off-duty. Your body and mind are perpetually at the disposal of your masters. This continuous demand for service, this inability to truly rest or detach, wears you down, turning you into a shadow of your former self. You might be assigned to care for children, a task that comes with its own particular set of emotional complexities. You care for them, perhaps even grow to feel affection for them, knowing that your bond is ultimately defined by your enslaved status. You're a caregiver, a nurturer, yet you possess no rights, no claim over these children you raise. This forced intimacy, coupled with the power imbalance, creates a strange and often painful dynamic. You remember your own family, your own children if you had them, and the sharp stab of grief is a constant companion. Food, while likely more regular than on the journey, is often basic and functional, designed to sustain your labour rather than offer enjoyment. You eat what you're given, where you're given it, often separately from the family, further reinforcing your status as an outsider, a lesser being. Even the simple act of eating becomes a symbol of your diminished status. There's a subtle game of power played out in gestures and glances, the way an owner might dismiss you with a wave of a hand or speak over you as if you weren't present. These seemingly small acts accumulate, reinforcing your perceived insignificance. You learn to make yourself small, to be inconspicuous, to anticipate desires before they are even articulated. It's an exhausting performance, a constant act of self-effacement. Sometimes, enslaved people in households were taught skills, reading, writing, specific crafts, which could, in rare instances, lead to slightly better treatment or even manumission. However, these skills were almost always for the benefit of the owner, increasing your value and utility, not necessarily to empower you for independent life. You learn these skills under duress, knowing they are another leash, not a key to freedom. Imagine the pressure of learning a complex new skill, like calligraphy or playing a musical instrument, knowing that failure could lead to severe punishment, and success only deepens your servitude. The contrast between the apparent tranquility of the household and the hidden horrors of your existence within it is stark. Outside, life might appear normal, even idyllic. Inside, you are a prisoner, bound not by iron chains, but by the invisible yet unbreakable bonds of servitude. The smiles of the children you care for, the pleasantries exchanged between guests, all serve as a cruel backdrop to your silent suffering. This form of slavery, while lacking the overt brutality of the Zanj rebellions or the explicit violence of castration, is a constant grinding assault on your spirit. It erodes your sense of self, makes you question your own worth, and teaches you that your existence is solely defined by your utility to others. The quiet desperation of domestic servitude, the constant fear of arbitrary punishment, and the relentless demands on your body and mind are a slow, torturous death of the spirit. You might try to form small bonds with other enslaved people in the household, whispered conversations in the dark, shared glances of understanding. These fleeting connections become vital lifelines, providing a tiny spark of shared humanity in an otherwise isolating existence. But even these connections are fraught with danger. A perceived conspiracy could lead to even harsher punishments. You learn to tread carefully, even in your moments of fleeting connection. This isn't a life of choice, or even of agency. It's a life of enduring, hoping against hope for an end that rarely comes. From the oppressive intimacy of the private household, You now find yourself in a world often depicted as one of exotic allure and veiled mystery, the harem. But quickly you learn that any perceived luxury or beauty within these gilded walls is merely a gilded cage, and the quiet opulence conceals profound layers of hidden agonies for the enslaved women confined within. You are no longer just a domestic servant. You are now part of a system designed to fulfill the desires and uphold the prestige of a powerful male. The air here is different. It's often perfumed, perhaps with jasmine or rosewater, and the sounds are muted, hushed. You might see shimmering silks, intricate tapestries and ornate furnishings. Initially there might be a deceptive sense of safety, a reprieve from the harshness of the outside world or the grueling labour you've endured. But this tranquility is superficial. You soon realise that the harem, despite its comforts, is a place of profound confinement, intense competition, and constant psychological pressure. Your freedom, if you ever had any, is completely surrendered here. You are one of many. The harem could house dozens, even hundreds of enslaved women, from concubines and personal attendants to musicians, dancers and caregivers. Your role might be specific: a chambermaid, a bath attendant, a masseuse, or more general, simply another body to serve the master and his family. The days are structured, revolving around the needs and whims of the master, his wives, and his children. While the physical labour might be less strenuous than working in fields, the mental and emotional demands are immense. The primary agony here is the absolute lack of personal agency and the constant struggle for favour. Your status, your comfort, even your very survival depend entirely on the master's unpredictable desires. You're perpetually aware that your position is precarious, that you can be elevated or cast aside at any moment. This creates an atmosphere of pervasive anxiety and often intense rivalry among the women. You are forced to compete, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, for attention, for gifts, for a moment of recognition. This internal strife, fueled by desperation, turns the harem into a complex web of alliances and betrayals. Your body is not your own. For concubines, specifically, sexual availability to the master is an explicit part of their role. Even for other enslaved women within the harem, there is an inherent vulnerability to sexual exploitation. The boundaries are fluid, the power imbalance absolute. You live with the constant underlying threat of being summoned, of having your body dictated by another's will. This persistent violation of autonomy, whether explicit or implicit, is a profound and unceasing trauma. One mainstream historical fact is that harems, while varying greatly in size and composition, were a common feature of elite households across the Islamic world, from the Umayyads to the Ottomans. They served not only as private residences for women and children, but also as centres of political intrigue and social power. The sheer number of enslaved women housed within some of the larger caliphal harems was astounding, sometimes numbering in the thousands. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the elaborate systems of communication and control within large harems, often employing eunuchs or trusted older enslaved women as intermediaries. Messages could be conveyed through coded gestures, specific gifts, or even the arrangement of flowers, creating a complex, almost theatrical sublanguage of intrigue and desire. Imagine trying to navigate such a nuanced, unspoken world, where a misinterpretation could have severe consequences. Historians still argue whether the relative comfort and security offered by some harems, particularly to concubines who bore children to the master, mitigated the profound loss of freedom and the psychological toll of their confinement. While some accounts suggest moments of affection or a degree of influence, the fundamental reality of their enslavement and the enforced loss of their past lives remain undeniable, leading to a debate about whether such benefits truly offset the inherent dehumanization. You remember that fleeting thought of safety when you first entered this place. It evaporates as you observe the chilling reality. Even if a woman bears a child to the master, elevating her status, she remains legally a slave unless explicitly manumitted. Her children, while often free if the father acknowledges them, are a testament to her lack of choice in their conception. The only true hope for personal advancement, or even just a semblance of security, is often tied to bearing a male heir, creating an intense, almost desperate pressure on the women to conceive and deliver. This turns the natural act of procreation into a strategic maneuver for survival. The mental anguish of knowing your future is entirely dependent on the whims of a single individual, and the shifting tides of favour is immense. You see women who were once favoured suddenly fall from grace, their previous luxury replaced by neglect or even banishment to a lesser part of the household. This constant insecurity breeds paranoia, making genuine friendship or trust a rarity. Every interaction is filtered through the lens of self-preservation. You are trained in etiquette, in pleasing the master, in appearing serene and beautiful, regardless of your inner turmoil. You learn to smile when you want to weep, to listen silently when you want to scream. This performance of contentment is another layer of your gilded cage, forcing you to suppress your true emotions and present a facade that meets the expectations of your captors. It's a form of emotional slavery, a quiet violence against your spirit. Even the most beautiful garments, the most exquisite jewellery, feel like a costume, a decoration for your owner's prestige, not a reflection of your own identity. You are dressed and adorned not for yourself, but for display, a living doll in a grand, restrictive play. The mirrors that reflect your adorned image offer no solace, only a reminder of your objectified existence. The sounds of music, often played by enslaved women themselves, can be beautiful, but they also serve as a constant backdrop to the underlying sadness. The melodic strains might mask whispered anxieties, concealed resentments, and desperate hopes. It's a strange juxtaposition. Beauty and confinement, artistry and suffering, all intertwined within the walls of the harem. You recall the family separation in the slave market, that searing pain. Here, the separation is more profound. Your previous life, your family, your very name, are meant to be forgotten. You're expected to reinvent yourself, or rather, be reinvented to fit the mould of the compliant, ornamental or serviceable woman of the harem. The loss of your original identity is an ongoing daily process. The sleepy ASMR cadence might feel particularly unsettling here, a gentle whisper describing a place of such quiet yet profound suffering. It's the insidious nature of the horror, not the loud, obvious violence, but the slow, crushing weight of confinement, competition, and complete surrender of self. One of the unique pressures within the harem is the competition for the master's attention. This isn't just about emotional connection, it's about survival. A woman who catches the master's eye might gain temporary favour, better food, new clothing, or even a chance at manumission. This intense rivalry could lead to manipulation, poisoning, and even infanticide, though such extreme acts were often hidden and rarely documented. The pressure to please, to be chosen, creates a toxic environment where trust is a luxury few can afford. Your existence in the harem is a constant paradox, surrounded by richness, yet utterly poor in freedom, adorned yet objectified, served yet fundamentally a servant. The gilded cage, indeed, offers protection from the harshness of the outside world, but at the cost of your very soul. You yearn for the freedom of the open sky, even if it means confronting the dangers of the desert again. Any physical hardship seems preferable to this slow, mental erosion. As time stretches, days turning into weeks, then months, the memories of your former life begin to blur, softened by the constant presence of your new reality. You're becoming a creature of the harem, adapting to its rhythms, its rules, its unspoken laws. This adaptation, while necessary for survival, is also a form of loss, a further step away from who you once were. You are trapped, a living exhibit of power and possession, your future entirely in the hands of others. The agony, then, is not just in what is done to you, but in what you are forced to become. From the oppressive confines of the harem, with its veiled agonies and psychological battles, you now face a different, perhaps even more brutal fate. The surgical theatre, for lack of a gentler term, that transforms men into eunuchs. This isn't just about labour or status. It's about a permanent, irreversible mutilation, a deliberate erasure of identity and potential, all to serve the structures of power and control within the Caliphates. Your heart pounds with a primal fear as you sense this particular horror approaching. The creation of eunuchs was a widespread practice, particularly in Abbasid, Fatimid, and later Ottoman courts, serving various roles from guardians of harems to administrators, tutors, and even military commanders. But before any of these roles, there was the operation. Imagine the terror of knowing what awaits you. You might be a young boy, captured, and brought to a specialised centre where such procedures were performed, often far from the public eye. The process itself was horrific, often carried out by non-Muslim specialists, particularly Coptic Christians in Egypt, who were allowed to perform such acts due to specific legal or social exemptions. This outsourcing of a taboo practice allowed Islamic authorities to benefit from eunuch labour, while maintaining a certain distance from the act itself. The procedure involved the complete removal of the testicles and, in many cases, the penis. This was done without modern anaesthetics, relying on crude methods to manage pain and prevent infection. You can only imagine the excruciating agony, the shock to the system, the unimaginable pain that would ripple through your body. Accounts describe various methods, from wrapping the genitals tightly, to induce numbness before cutting, to using boiling oil or hot ashes immediately after, to staunch the bleeding and cauterize the wound. The risk of death from hemorrhage or infection was incredibly high, estimated by some historians to be as high as 90% in the immediate aftermath. For those who survived, the physical scars were deep, but the psychological ones ran even deeper. The purpose of creating eunuchs was multifaceted. Primarily, it was to ensure the fidelity of women in harems by providing male attendants who posed no sexual threat. Eunuchs were also seen as highly trustworthy in administrative roles, as they theoretically had no family or lineage to promote, and thus their loyalty would be solely to their master. This concept, however, often overlooked the profound personal trauma and the complex loyalties that eunuchs often developed within their unique social position. You awaken from the procedure, if you even retain consciousness, in a haze of pain and disorientation. Your body feels alien, irrevocably altered. The first few days are a desperate struggle against infection and fever. Every movement, every breath, sends fresh waves of agony. You're likely confined, perhaps in a special recovery area, with others who have undergone the same torment. The silence of these spaces, broken only by suppressed moans, is profoundly chilling. One mainstream historical fact is the significant role eunuchs played in the administration and daily life of many Islamic caliphates and empires. They held positions of immense power and influence, managing vast households, overseeing state treasuries, commanding armies, and even acting as regents. Despite their mutilated status, or perhaps because of it, they often became indispensable figures, wielding power far exceeding their social standing. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the development of a distinct eunuch culture and social hierarchy within certain courts. Eunuchs, often living in close proximity and sharing their unique experience, sometimes formed strong bonds of camaraderie and mutual support. They might even develop their own unique dialects or social customs, a testament to their resilience and adaptation in the face of profound adversity. It's a strange mix of victimhood and self-organisation in the most peculiar of circumstances. Historians still argue whether the high social status and political power achieved by many eunuchs in Islamic courts truly compensated for the brutal, life-altering act of castration and the inherent limitations it imposed on their personal lives, particularly regarding family and procreation. While some eunuchs undoubtedly amassed great wealth and influence, the underlying trauma and the forced nature of their condition remained central to their story. Your voice might change, becoming higher-pitched, and your body would likely remain prepubescent in its development if the procedure was performed before puberty. These physical markers serve as a constant public reminder of your mutilation, a brand that cannot be hidden. You're defined by what you lack, not by what you possess. This visible difference sets you apart, both isolating you and marking you for a specific confined role in society. The psychological impact is immense. You are robbed of the ability to father children, a fundamental aspect of identity and lineage in many cultures. This loss, coupled with the trauma of the procedure, often led to deep emotional scars, including depression, anger, and a pervasive sense of emptiness. You are a living testament to the ultimate power of your enslavers to redefine your very being. Yet, paradoxically, you begin to understand the unique position you now hold. You're granted access to forbidden spaces, the women's quarters, the innermost sanctums of power, simply because you are considered safe. This access bestows a certain power, an ability to observe, to listen, to mediate. You become an indispensable conduit of information, a trusted confidant, or a vigilant guard. You are neither man nor woman, a liminal being navigating a world structured by gender. You might be educated, taught to read and write, to manage finances, to administer complex households. Your intelligence, your loyalty, and your lack of personal ambition, at least in the eyes of your masters, make you valuable. You become a fixture in the palace, a silent observer of the intrigues and machinations of power. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen and the harsh sun of the desert. Those seem almost trivial now compared to the chill that runs through you from this inner transformation. There's a dark irony in your elevated status. You are powerful, yet utterly powerless over your own body. You might command respect, yet you are fundamentally a slave. Your wealth and influence are derived entirely from your master's favour, and they can be withdrawn at any moment. This precariousness, this constant awareness of your subservient position, is another form of confinement, a gilded cage built of influence rather than physical walls. You learn to suppress your emotions, to project an impassive demeanour. This emotional armour becomes a survival mechanism, protecting you from the constant reminders of your loss. You learn to be shrewd, to observe, to play the political games of the court, not for your own personal gain in the traditional sense, but for security, for continued favour, for a modicum of control over your narrow world. The stories you might hear from older eunuchs, hushed tales of the operating table, of lives before, of silent endurance, become a grim form of education. You are initiated into a brotherhood of shared suffering, a silent understanding passing between those who have endured the same unspeakable violation. This shared experience, while isolating you from the rest of society, also creates a unique bond among eunuchs themselves. This permanent alteration is the ultimate act of control, designed to ensure loyalty and obedience through a profound physical and psychological wounding. You are a living monument to the lengths to which power will go to ensure its own perpetuation. Your existence, therefore, is a stark reminder of the horrors of human subjugation, a chilling testament to the price of absolute power etched into your very being. From the hushed, perfumed corridors of the harem and the stark, painful reality of eunuch-making, your journey through the horrors of Islamic slavery now takes a sharply martial turn. You're no longer destined for domesticity or courtly intrigue. Instead, you are plunged into the rigorous, often brutal world of military slavery. You're about to become a Mamluk, a trained warrior, a soldier forged from the raw material of human chattel, and this path carries its own unique brand of cruelty and dehumanization. You're likely a young boy, perhaps captured from the steppes of Central Asia, the Caucasus, or parts of Eastern Europe. You're chosen for your physical prowess, your potential, and your youth, which makes you pliable and easier to indoctrinate. Your previous identity, your family, your culture, all are systematically stripped away. You're given a new, often Arabic, name. Your training begins almost immediately, a relentless regimen designed to break your spirit and rebuild you as a loyal, formidable fighting machine. Imagine waking before dawn to the harsh shouts of drill sergeants. Your days are a blur of physical exertion. Endless drills, weapon training, riding, and rigorous calisthenics. You're taught to wield swords, spears, bows, and later, firearms, with deadly precision. Your body is pushed to its absolute limits, aching with fatigue, bruised from falls, calloused from repetitive motions. The training is intentionally brutal, designed not just to impart skills, but to forge resilience and unquestioning obedience. Any weakness, any hesitation, is met with swift, often violent punishment. Beatings, deprivation of food, and extra physical drills are common disciplinary measures. The goal is to instill absolute loyalty, not to a family or a homeland, but to the master who purchased and trained you. This is achieved through a combination of harsh discipline, shared hardship, and a sophisticated system of patronage. You're cut off from your origins, raised within a tightly controlled military compound, with your only social ties being to your fellow Mamluks and your trainers. This forced isolation from outside influences is a powerful tool for indoctrination, ensuring that your primary allegiance is to your core and your master. You share dormitories with other Mamluks, a brotherhood forged in shared suffering. There's a strange camaraderie here, a bond born of mutual experience and survival. You rely on each other, often forming lifelong loyalties that can, paradoxically, sometimes supersede loyalty to the master. This internal cohesion, while beneficial for the Mamluks themselves, also presented a potential threat to the ruling powers who sought to control them. One mainstream historical fact is the extraordinary political and military power achieved by Mamluk forces in various Islamic dynasties, most famously in Egypt and Syria, where they established their own Mamluk Sultanate, 1250 to 1517. These were not just bodyguards. They became the backbone of armies, decisive forces in battles against Crusaders and Mongols, and ultimately rulers themselves. Their rise to power illustrates a unique paradox of slavery. Individuals initially without rights becoming the ultimate arbiters of power. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the Mamluks' intense focus on equestrian skills and archery. Their training often included elaborate displays of horsemanship, where they would practice shooting arrows backwards while at a full gallop, a manoeuvre known as the Parthian shot. These skills were not just for battle, but also for grand military parades and spectacles, showcasing their formidable abilities and the investment made in their training. Imagine the hours of practice, the falls, the relentless pursuit of perfection in such dangerous manoeuvres. Historians still argue whether the Mamluk system, by elevating enslaved individuals to positions of power and offering them a clear path to social mobility, albeit within a highly constrained military hierarchy, was a more humane form of slavery compared to agricultural or domestic servitude. While it undeniably offered more opportunities for advancement and even freedom, the initial brutalization, the forced separation from family, and the lifelong nature of their military service still firmly place it within the realm of profound human subjugation. Your education isn't limited to combat. You might also receive instruction in Arabic, Islamic studies, administration, and even court etiquette. This comprehensive training prepares you not just for the battlefield, but for roles in the state bureaucracy, reflecting the trust placed in these detached, loyal servants. You learn to read, to write, to understand the complex machinery of power, making you a vital cog in the Caliphate's engine. The battlefield is the ultimate test. You are sent to fight, to kill, and to die for your master's cause. You face enemies from rival caliphates, crusaders, Mongols, or rebellious local populations. The horrors of war, the screams, the blood, the chaotic melee become your grim reality. You witness atrocities, inflict them, and survive, often with physical scars that bear testament to your military servitude. The bond with your fellow Mamluks, forged in the crucible of battle, becomes your only true family. There's a strange kind of freedom in the absolute discipline. Your choices are removed, replaced by the rigid structure of military life. You are told when to eat, when to sleep, when to fight. This lack of personal decision-making, while oppressive, can also be strangely liberating from the anxieties of a free life. But it's a cold comfort, a psychological defense mechanism against the fundamental loss of autonomy. You remember that gentle sarcasm from the narrator? It feels particularly out of place here. The Mamluk training, while yielding powerful warriors, was utterly devoid of softness or jest. It was a relentless grind, a systematic breaking down of the individual to create a highly efficient, obedient tool of state power. The constant threat of being disfavoured or punished for perceived disloyalty hangs over you, even as you rise through the ranks. While a Mamluk could achieve immense power, even becoming a sultan, their position was always tenuous, dependent on maintaining the favour of the ruling elite and demonstrating continued effectiveness. The path to power was often paved with the betrayals and assassinations of rivals, even among fellow Mamluks. You might acquire wealth, even your own enslaved people, as you advance. This is a cruel irony. A person who was once property now owns property, perpetuating the very system that enslaved them. This perpetuation speaks to the deeply ingrained nature of slavery within these societies, where even those who rose from its depths often saw it as a natural order rather than as injustice to be abolished. Your life, though seemingly one of power and prestige, is fundamentally one of service. Your identity is irrevocably tied to your military role. You are a Mamluk first and foremost, a product of a system that consumed your youth and reshaped your destiny. The internal conflict of being a powerful figure yet still fundamentally belonging to someone else, or to the state, is a constant subtle burden. The discipline, the rigour, the constant readiness for battle become ingrained. Even if manumitted, the Mamluk identity often sticks with you, defining your approach to life. You carry the scars, both visible and invisible, of a childhood spent in training for war, of a life lived always on the edge of combat and political intrigue. Your body is a finely tuned instrument of destruction. but your soul bears the marks of its forced construction. As you reach maturity, you might lead your own contingents of soldiers, perhaps even your own captured boys, perpetuating the cycle. The loyalty you felt for your trainers is now demanded from your subordinates. The memory of your own brutal induction serves as a template for how you train the next generation. It's a system designed for self-perpetuation, endlessly consuming new lives to maintain its power. You glance back at the image of the crocodile dung sunscreen, that fleeting detail from earlier. It feels so impossibly distant now, almost whimsical. The desert heat was a challenge, but it was nothing compared to the fiery crucible in which Mamluk warriors were forged, a process designed to strip away all softness, all individuality, leaving behind only the sharp edge of a weapon. Your life is defined by obedience, combat, and the ever-present shadow of your enslaved origins. Having traversed the specialized horrors of the harem and the brutal discipline of the Mamluk barracks, your journey now descends into a different kind of hell. The vast, sun-baked fields and marshes where enslaved individuals were forced into agricultural labour. This isn't the prestige of a courtly role or the controlled violence of a military life. This is back-breaking, ceaseless toil, a slow, grinding death under the open sky, particularly brutal in places like the salt flats and sugarcane plantations of the Basra marshes. Imagine the dawn breaking, not with the gentle whisper of a narrator, but with the sharp crack of a whip. You're roused from a short, restless sleep on the hard ground of a communal barrack or a flimsy, unventilated hut. The air is already thick with the oppressive heat, even at first light, promising another day of unbearable exposure. Your body, already weary from the journey and previous forms of servitude, now faces a relentless physical challenge that pushes it beyond human endurance. You are herded into vast fields, often under the watchful eyes of overseers armed with whips and sticks. The work varies by region and crop, but the common denominator is its sheer arduousness. In places like Egypt, you might be digging irrigation canals, moving heavy earth under the scorching sun. In other areas, you could be tending date palms, harvesting grains, or cultivating olives. But perhaps the most notorious and horrifying form of agricultural labour, and a major focus of historical accounts, was the cultivation of sugar cane and the extraction of salt in the swampy saline lands near Basra in southern Iraq. The Basra marshes were a particularly dreadful place for enslaved labour. Here, you would be forced to clear vast stretches of salt-encrusted land, removing the top layer of saline earth to prepare the soil for cultivation, primarily for sugarcane. This involved digging, shoveling and hauling heavy abrasive soil, often barefoot in the marshy, caustic conditions. The salt would irritate open wounds, exacerbating infections, and the stagnant water provided a breeding ground for diseases. The air would hang heavy with humidity and the stench of brackish water and human waste. The work is incessant. There are no breaks beyond the absolute minimum needed to keep you alive. You labour from sunup to sundown, your muscles screaming, your skin burnt and blistered by the sun and the corrosive salt. Your hands, once perhaps soft or accustomed to different tools, become calloused, cracked, and often infected. The tools you use are crude and heavy, designed for efficiency, not comfort. You are a human engine, powering an agricultural enterprise through sheer, brute force. Food is minimal and often of poor quality, just enough to fuel your labour, but never to truly nourish you. Water, if available, is often warm and unclean, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases. You learn to suppress the gnawing hunger, the constant thirst, pushing them to the back of your mind as you focus on the next swing of the shovel, the next armful of cane. One mainstream historical fact is that the reliance on large-scale enslaved labour for agricultural production, especially in challenging environments like the Basra marshes, was a significant feature of the Abbasid Caliphate's economy during its peak. This demand for labour led to massive imports of enslaved people, particularly the Zanj from East Africa, who were deemed suitable for such harsh work due to racist stereotypes about their endurance. The scale of this operation was immense, turning vast tracts of land into productive and profitable agricultural zones. A quirky or fringe tidbit, if one can call it that in such a context, is the specific types of tools and techniques developed for working in the saline marshes. Enslaved labourers were often forced to construct intricate networks of ditches and embankments to manage the water and improve drainage, a feat of engineering carried out under the most inhumane conditions. These feats highlight the ingenuity of human labour, tragically deployed in the service of exploitation. Historians still argue whether the scale of agricultural slavery in the Abbasid Caliphate, particularly the Zanj population in the Basra region, represented a unique deviation from other forms of Islamic slavery due to its sheer brutality and factory-like scale, or if it was merely an extreme manifestation of practices common across the broader Islamic world. The debate often centres on the uniqueness of the Zanj experience compared to other enslaved populations. Diseases are rampant. Malaria, dysentery, cholera and other fevers sweep through the enslaved population with terrifying speed. Without proper medical care, rest or nutrition, countless individuals succumb. You witness the agonising deaths of those around you, their bodies succumbing to the relentless assault of illness and exhaustion. The air is often heavy with the smell of sickness and despair. Your own body feels constantly on the verge of breaking down, a fever always lurking just beneath the surface. Punishments for perceived slacking or defiance are brutal and immediate. Overseers carry whips, and their blows are swift and merciless. You might see individuals tied up and flogged, left in the sun for hours, or subjected to other cruelties designed to instill terror and ensure compliance. The goal is to extract maximum labour at minimum cost, and human suffering is simply an externality. You learn to work faster, to feign energy even when your limbs are screaming, to avoid the overseer's gaze. The environment itself is a tormentor. Mosquitoes swarm, biting relentlessly, spreading disease. Scorpions and snakes are a constant danger in the fields. The sun's glare is blinding and there's little to no shade. You're utterly exposed to the elements, your body a canvas for the harsh realities of your existence. You remember that small detail from earlier, the crocodile dung sunscreen. It feels like a dark joke in this context, utterly useless against the pervasive, inescapable torment of the Basra marshes. Your identity, already eroded by capture and market, is further stripped away here. You're just a labourer, part of a faceless mass, defined solely by your capacity for physical work. Your individual dreams, memories and aspirations are irrelevant. Your existence is reduced to a cycle of toil, hunger and a desperate search for a moment of rest. The psychological impact of this endless, meaningless grind is soul-crushing. Families, if they manage to stay together this far, are often separated here, allocated to different work groups or even different plantations. The bonds of kinship are a liability, a potential source of resistance or distraction. The system prefers atomised individuals, easier to control, easier to exploit. The pain of separation, fresh in your memory from the slave market, is revisited here with cruel regularity. The work can feel endless, rows stretching into the horizon, seemingly infinite tasks day after day, year after year. The thought of escape might flicker, but where would you go? The desert is behind you, and the settled lands around are controlled by the very people who enslave you. The sheer scale of the operation, the overwhelming power of the caliphate, makes resistance seem futile, a desperate dream. Yet, despite this profound subjugation, glimmers of human resilience can emerge. Shared glances among fellow labourers, a whispered word of encouragement, a small act of solidarity. These fleeting moments become incredibly significant. They are small acts of defiance against the system's attempts to utterly dehumanise you, reminding you that beneath the exhausted body, a human spirit still endures, however battered. This agricultural servitude, particularly in the most brutal environments, represents the peak of exploitative labour within the caliphate. It was a system built on the systematic destruction of human lives for economic gain, turning fertile lands into fields of suffering. The horrors here are not subtle. They are overt, constant, and etched into every fibre of your being. You are a living testament to the human capacity for endurance and the equally profound human capacity for cruelty. From the scorching, disease-ridden fields of agricultural labour, your grim journey now takes you deep into the earth, into the suffocating darkness and crushing despair of forced mining enslavement. This form of exploitation represents an even more direct confrontation with death, where the earth itself becomes a malevolent force, constantly threatening to entomb you. This isn't just backbreaking work, it's a terrifying descent into claustrophobia, danger, and utter hopelessness. Imagine being led not into the open fields but to the mouth of a dark, narrow shaft. The air immediately changes. It becomes cooler, heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth, minerals, and something else. the acrid tang of fear and stale sweat. You are forced into these subterranean labyrinths, often with rudimentary tools, picks, shovels, and perhaps a small lamp or torch, casting flickering shadows that dance like spectres on the rough-hewn walls. The darkness quickly swallows the light from the outside world, and with it, any lingering sense of hope. The purpose of this forced labour is the extraction of precious metals and minerals, gold, silver, copper, lead, salt, or even more exotic stones. These mines, often located in remote, desolate regions, are vital to the Caliphate's economy, fueling its coinage, its opulent palaces, and its vast trade networks. And you, the enslaved miner, are the human engine that extracts this wealth from the unyielding rock. The conditions are nightmarish. The air is often choked with dust, making every breath a struggle. You cough, your lungs burning, knowing that this dust is slowly, inexorably destroying them. The tunnels are frequently cramped, forcing you to work in stooped or kneeling positions for hours on end, straining your back and limbs. The oppressive weight of the earth above you is a constant, terrifying presence, a reminder that a collapse could occur at any moment, burying you alive. The claustrophobia alone is enough to drive some to madness. Accidents are rampant. Rockfalls, cave-ins, and tunnel collapses are common occurrences. You witness fellow enslaved individuals crushed, impaled, or trapped beneath tons of earth. The cries of the injured, the frantic attempts to dig them out, often futile, become a grim soundtrack to your existence. There are no safety precautions, no rescue teams, no consideration for your well-being. Your life is cheap, easily replaced by the next shipment of captives. If you are injured, you are likely left to die, or, if your injury is severe enough to render you useless, simply discarded. The darkness is profound. Even with a lamp, the light barely penetrates the vastness of the tunnels, creating a disorienting, isolating experience. You might work in near-total darkness for hours, your only guide the sound of your pick against the rock and the laboured breathing of those around you. This sensory deprivation, combined with the constant threat of death, chips away at your sanity. One mainstream historical fact is the reliance on enslaved labour in various mining operations across the Islamic world, from the gold mines of Nubia, modern-day Sudan, to silver mines in Persia, modern-day Iran, and lead mines in North Africa. These mines were notoriously brutal, leading to high mortality rates and constant demand for new enslaved individuals to replace those who perished. The wealth extracted from these mines directly supported the power and luxury of the caliphs and their courts. A quirky or fringe tidbit, if one could apply such a term to this horror, involves the use of certain animals like donkeys or mules within the mines to haul ore. These animals were often as ill-treated as the human labourers, sharing their confinement and dangerous existence. Sometimes their carcasses would remain in collapsed tunnels, a grim monument to the shared suffering of both human and beast. It's a small detail that underscores the absolute disregard for life in these environments. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates in these mines were a deliberate, calculated outcome of the system, i.e., it was cheaper to work enslaved individuals to death and replace them than to provide humane conditions, or simply an unavoidable consequence of primitive mining technology and inherently dangerous conditions. While technology certainly played a role, the profound lack of care for human life undoubtedly exacerbated the dangers to an extreme degree. Food and water are scarce, often delivered irregularly. You're given just enough to sustain your grueling labour, to prevent immediate collapse, but never enough to truly recover or maintain your health. The quality is poor, and disease spreads rapidly in the damp, confined spaces, further weakening your already depleted body. Respiratory illnesses are particularly prevalent, as are skin infections and fevers caused by the unsanitary conditions. Escape is virtually impossible. The mines are often located in remote, inhospitable areas, far from any sympathetic populations. The tunnels themselves are a labyrinth, designed to trap those within. Even if you somehow manage to surface, the vast, unforgiving landscape outside offers little chance of survival without food, water, or knowledge of the terrain. You are truly imprisoned, both by the earth and by the systems of control. You remember the vastness of the desert from Section 2, the freedom of an open sky, even under duress. Here, the sky is replaced by tons of rock pressing down on you. The external dangers of the desert, thirst, heat, sandstorms, are replaced by the internal dangers of the mine, collapsing tunnels, toxic air, perpetual darkness. It is a different kind of hell, perhaps even more terrifying because it is so inescapable. The silence of the deep earth is broken only by the clang of picks, the creak of timber supports, and the occasional groans of exhausted or injured labourers. Communication is often minimal, reduced to grunts and simple commands. The dehumanization here is total. You're reduced to a physical machine, your sole purpose to extract wealth from the earth until your body gives out. The psychological impact of working in such conditions is immense. The constant fear of death, the physical pain, the isolation, and the complete absence of light or hope contribute to a profound sense of despair. You might lose track of time, days blending into weeks in the endless gloom. The outside world becomes a distant, fading memory. Your dreams, if you dare to have them, are likely haunted by the dark tunnels. Sometimes, enslaved people were forced to construct the very supports that held the tunnels, working with crude timber that often proved inadequate against the immense geological pressures. The irony is bitter. You're forced to build the very walls of your prison, knowing they could become your tomb. The owners and overseers of these mines typically live far from the dangers, profiting from your suffering. They view the enslaved miners as expendable resources, calculating their value in terms of the ore they can extract versus the cost of replacing them. This cold, economic calculation is perhaps one of the most horrifying aspects of the system, reducing human lives to mere lines in a ledger. You might feel the tremors of the earth, the slight shift of rock, and your heart jumps. Every creak of the timbers, every distant rumble sends a jolt of fear through you. Living on the edge of catastrophe day after day, year after year, fundamentally changes you. It strips away all but the raw instinct for survival, leaving you hollowed out and utterly depleted. This descent into the earth is not just a physical journey, it is a descent into the very depths of human misery. The gold, silver, and other minerals that glitter in the palaces and adorn the powerful are stained with the sweat, tears, and blood of countless enslaved individuals like yourself, entombed in the darkness beneath the earth. Your suffering fuels their luxury, a stark and brutal exchange. Emerging from the suffocating darkness of the mines, you might briefly feel the sun on your face, but it offers little warmth of true freedom. Your journey through the horrors of Islamic Caliphate slavery now transitions to another monumental, soul-crushing endeavour: the construction of vast infrastructure, the grand mosques, sprawling palaces, elaborate irrigation systems, and fortified cities that were the hallmarks of these powerful empires. You are now part of the faceless, disposable workforce used for public works, building empires with your very body and often at the cost of your life. Imagine being driven to a bustling construction site. The air here is thick with dust, the clang of hammers, the shouts of foremen, and the rhythmic chants of labourers. You see enormous blocks of stone, freshly cut timber, and piles of bricks awaiting assembly. Unlike the hidden misery of the mines, the scale of this suffering is open and monumental. Your task is to contribute to something grand, something designed to last for centuries, yet your own existence is treated as utterly ephemeral. The physical demands are immense. You might be quarrying stone from distant sites, often miles away, and then hauling these massive blocks, sometimes weighing tons, using only crude ropes, wooden rollers, and brute human strength. The sun beats down on you relentlessly, just as it did in the agricultural fields. But here, the weight you carry is far heavier, the risk of injury from falling objects or collapsing structures ever present. You are a human beast of burden, your back perpetually aching, your muscles strained to their breaking point. You could be digging foundations for immense buildings, toiling in deep pits under unstable earth, constantly aware of the risk of cave-ins. Or perhaps you're mixing mortar, carrying heavy loads of sand and water, your hands raw and cracked. For skilled enslaved labourers, the work might involve shaping intricate carvings, laying complex tile patterns, or erecting towering minarets, always under immense pressure to meet exacting standards, with punishment awaiting any perceived flaw or delay. You are a component in a vast machine, your individual skill or effort subsumed by the grand scale of the project. The sheer volume of human energy poured into these projects is staggering. Think of the great mosque of Samarra with its spiral minaret, the fortified walls of Cairo, the intricate palaces of Baghdad. Each stone, Each brick, each perfectly laid tile represents countless hours of enslaved labour, sweat, tears, and often lives lost. This is not just construction. It is the forced imposition of power and prestige built on the backs of the exploited. One mainstream historical fact is the extensive use of enslaved labour, alongside free and conscripted workers, in major construction projects throughout the Islamic world. From the early Umayyad Caliphate to the later Abbasid and Fatimid periods, grand public works were essential for establishing authority, facilitating trade, and showcasing the wealth and might of the ruling dynasties. These projects served as concrete manifestations of caliphal power, often built with little regard for the human cost. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the occasional use of specialised enslaved artisans or engineers who, despite their enslaved status, were invaluable for their unique skills in architecture, hydraulics, or masonry. While still ultimately compelled to work, their expertise might afford them slightly better conditions or a degree of respect. A strange exception that highlights the paradox of skilled chattel. Imagine being an artistic genius, your talent celebrated, yet your body remains property, your freedom an impossible dream. Historians still argue whether the use of enslaved labour in public works was primarily an economic choice, cheaper than paid labour, or a strategic decision by rulers to exert absolute control and demonstrate their power through the mobilisation of vast captive workforces. While economics certainly played a role, the political symbolism of having an army of forced labourers at one's disposal was undeniable, asserting dominance over both land and human life. Safety is non-existent. Accidents are a daily occurrence. Heavy stones slip, scaffolding collapses, tools are dropped from heights. You witness gruesome injuries, crushed limbs, broken bones, severe head trauma. Those too injured to work are simply cast aside, left to die or suffer without aid. Their pain is a grim lesson for the others. Keep working, or you will be next. Your life is expendable, a cheap commodity in the grand scheme of building an empire. The work is supervised by overseers, often non-enslaved individuals who drive the labourers with whips and shouts. Beatings are common, used to enforce pace and discipline. You learn to dread the sound of their voices, the sight of their raised arms. There is no appeal, no recourse, no escape from their arbitrary power. Your body is pushed to its absolute physical limits, and then beyond. You recall the trans-Saharan march, the endless sand, the feeling of the sun. Here, the sun is just as merciless. But now you're also burdened by immense loads, by the constant danger of falling objects. The physical suffering is compounded by the psychological weight of knowing you are building structures that will stand for centuries, symbols of power and permanence, while your own existence is temporary and completely controlled. Water is rationed, just enough to prevent immediate collapse, but never enough to truly quench the burning thirst. Food is meagre, barely sustaining your energy for the arduous tasks. You're kept in a state of perpetual hunger and dehydration, a state designed to extract maximum labour while minimising upkeep. Your body is a machine, fueled minimally, worked relentlessly. The noise of the construction site is deafening, the rhythmic thud of hammers on stone, the grating sound of ropes pulling heavy loads, the constant murmur of thousands of voices. There is no peace, no quiet contemplation. Your mind is assaulted by the ceaseless din, reflecting the chaos and brutality of your environment. You miss the quiet moments of despair, those small pockets of internal solitude you found on the journey or in the mines. Despite the dehumanization, you might witness small acts of resistance, a deliberate slowdown of work, a tool accidentally broken, a whispered word of encouragement to a fellow labourer. These are tiny sparks of defiance, often dangerous but vital for maintaining a shred of dignity. You remember that sense of shared experience with other Mamluks. But here, in this mass of undifferentiated labour, such bonds are harder to form, more fleeting. The irony is not lost on you. You are building the very infrastructure that reinforces the power of your enslavers, the physical embodiment of their dominance. The grand palaces you construct will house the very elites who sanction your suffering. The irrigation systems will water the fields that produce the food that barely sustains you. You are literally constructing the chains that bind you. When the workday finally ends, exhausted, you collapse into crowded, unsanitary barracks. Sleep offers little respite, often interrupted by the moans of the injured, the restless movements of hundreds of other exhausted bodies, or the ever-present gnawing of hunger. Disease spreads easily in these close quarters, a constant threat to your already weakened body. The grand structures you help build are symbols of might and civilization, but for you they are monuments to endless toil and suffering. They are reminders of lost lives, crushed spirits, and the immense human cost of unchecked power. Every arch, every column, every meticulously crafted detail holds the imprint of forced labour, a silent scream etched into the very stone. You are a ghost in the machine, a forgotten soul whose anonymous labour built the foundations of empires. Having endured the soul-crushing toil of public works and the dangerous depths of the mines, your journey through the horrors of Islamic Caliphate slavery now confronts one of its most pervasive and intimately dehumanizing aspects, sexual exploitation. This isn't about physical labour or grand structures. It's about the systematic commodification of bodies, the brutal disregard for consent, and the profound violation of personal autonomy, faced primarily by enslaved women, but sometimes by men as well. Imagine the constant, pervasive anxiety. Every glance from an owner or a male member of the household, every command, carries an unspoken undercurrent of threat. You are a woman, and in this system, your body is deemed property, an asset to be utilised for pleasure, procreation, or status. Your desires, your feelings, your right to say no, these do not exist. You're perpetually vulnerable, your dignity constantly under assault. For countless enslaved women, sexual exploitation was an inherent part of their servitude, regardless of their primary duties. Whether you were a domestic servant, a concubine in a harem, as we discussed, a form of forced sexual service, a performer, or even just a field worker, the risk of sexual violence or coerced sexual relations was ever present. This was not an anomaly. It was an ingrained, accepted component of the institution of slavery. The constant psychological burden of this vulnerability is immense, leading to a pervasive sense of fear and helplessness. You might be forced into concubinage, a formal status where your primary role is to be a sexual partner for your master. This is not a relationship of choice or affection, but one of absolute power imbalance. Your body is perpetually at his disposal. You might be given a comfortable living, fine clothes, or even jewels, as we touched upon in the harem section, but these are merely the trappings of your gilded cage. They do not compensate for the fundamental violation of your bodily autonomy, the fact that you are compelled to participate in intimate acts against your will. This forced intimacy, the requirement to appear willing or even pleased, is a profound and deeply traumatizing form of psychological torture. The concept of consent, as we understand it today, was entirely absent. An enslaved woman could not legally refuse her master. Any resistance could be met with severe physical punishment, further reinforcing the absolute nature of his control over her body. This power dynamic means that any sexual act, even if seemingly consensual on the surface, due to the absence of overt struggle, was fundamentally coercive. One mainstream historical fact is the widespread institution of concubinage in Islamic societies, where enslaved women were legally permissible sexual partners for their male owners. The children born from these unions were often free and legitimate if acknowledged by their father, a unique aspect compared to many other slave systems. However, this legal recognition of the child did not negate the enslaved status of the mother or the coercive nature of the relationship that produced the child. A quirky or fringe tidbit, which highlights the bizarre intersections of this system, involves the careful classification and pricing of enslaved women in markets based on their perceived sexual attractiveness, virginity, and even their ability to sing or dance, which enhanced their value as concubines or entertainers. Imagine being assessed like a piece of livestock, with your most intimate attributes being openly discussed and monetized. It speaks to the ultimate commodification of human sexuality. Historians still argue whether the possibility of manumission for mothers of children born to their masters, known as walad, and the legal recognition of these children as free, mitigated the overall dehumanization and suffering caused by sexual slavery. While it offered a path to freedom for some women and their progeny, it was still predicated on forced sexual acts, and did not remove the initial trauma or the fundamental lack of agency over their own bodies. You might become pregnant, a stark reminder of your lack of control. The pregnancy and childbirth, often without proper medical care, are fraught with risk. The child, if recognised by the master, might be free, but you, the mother, remain enslaved, forever bound to the household by this new life. The joy of motherhood is overshadowed by the grim reality of your circumstances, the knowledge that this child is also, in a sense, a product of your exploitation. The impact of sexual exploitation extends beyond the immediate act. It leaves deep, lasting psychological scars, shame, fear, a profound sense of defilement, and an inability to trust. You might internalize the degradation, believing that your body truly is merely a tool for others' pleasure. This self-hatred, fostered by constant violation, is a subtle yet devastating form of enduring torment. For enslaved men and boys, the threat of personal violation also existed, though perhaps less formally institutionalized than the arrangements imposed on women. Young, attractive boys might be purchased for exploitative purposes, particularly in elite households or among certain segments of society. The trauma for these individuals is equally profound, involving non-consensual encounters and the stripping away of their dignity and bodily autonomy. You recall the crocodile dung sunscreen, a fleeting memory of agency in protecting your body from the elements. Here, there is no such agency. Your body is not yours to protect, not yours to control. It is subject to the whims of others, mistreated and dominated at will, a chilling testament to the total control of the master over the enslaved. The social dynamics within a household or harem become incredibly complex. Rivalries among women, jealousies from free wives, and the constant maneuvering for favour and protection create a tense, dangerous environment. You might be targeted by others, or even used as a pawn in their schemes, further amplifying your vulnerability. There's little solidarity, only a desperate struggle for survival. The silence surrounding sexual exploitation is also a form of horror. Such acts were rarely discussed openly, much less condemned, within the prevailing social norms. The victims had no voice, no recourse, no avenue for justice. Their suffering was private, often hidden, and dismissed as an unfortunate but acceptable consequence of their enslaved status. This silence compounds the trauma, making you feel utterly alone in your pain. The sleepy ASMR cadence feels almost jarring when describing such stark violation, a whispered horror that makes the reality even more chilling. It's the contrast between the calm delivery and the utter brutality of the subject matter that lends it a particularly unsettling quality. Your memories of a past life, of any relationships built on mutual respect or affection, are tainted by this new reality. The very concept of intimacy is distorted, replaced by a transactional, coercive relationship. You might withdraw emotionally, building walls around yourself to protect the last vestiges of your inner world, but even that is a form of loss. The sheer unpredictability of when or how these demands might be made adds to the constant stress. You are always on guard, always prepared for the worst. This hypervigilance, this inability to ever truly relax, is a corrosive force, slowly eroding your mental and emotional well-being. This aspect of slavery represents a profound assault on the very essence of personhood. It is the ultimate violation of human dignity, reducing individuals to mere vessels for another's gratification or procreation. Your body becomes a site of continuous trauma, and your spirit, if it survives, is left permanently scarred, a testament to the horrifying acts committed against the most vulnerable. This is not just a chapter in your journey, it is a wound that never truly heals. Having traversed the harrowing landscapes of forced labour and the deeply personal violations of sexual exploitation, you now come to a seismic moment in your grim journey. The eruption of collective resistance. This is where the profound misery and accumulated injustices boil over, culminating in the desperate, often brutal, fury of a slave rebellion, particularly epitomised by the monumental Zanj uprising. This isn't a quiet horror. It's a roar of defiance, a bloody struggle for freedom against overwhelming odds. Imagine the atmosphere in the vast agricultural camps or marshland settlements near Basra. The air is thick not just with humidity and the stench of the swamps, but with a palpable sense of simmering resentment, a collective anger that has been building for generations. You're surrounded by thousands of fellow enslaved individuals, mostly of African origin, the Zanj, forced into the most brutal forms of labour, enduring starvation, disease, and relentless cruelty. The conditions are so utterly unbearable that the idea of death becomes preferable to continued servitude. The Zanj uprising, which began in 869 CE, and lasted for over 14 years, was one of the largest and most devastating slave revolts in history. It wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but the culmination of decades of systematic exploitation and dehumanization. You hear whispers among your fellow labourers, hushed conversations about a leader, Ali ibn Muhammad, who promises justice, freedom, and a new order. He might be a charlatan, or a genuine messianic figure, but to you, desperate for any shred of hope, his words ignite a flicker of possibility. The initial spark of rebellion is often chaotic, violent, and utterly desperate. You might witness the sudden overwhelming of an overseer, the seizing of tools which quickly become makeshift weapons. The pent-up rage explodes outwards. The first targets are often those who inflicted the most immediate suffering, the overseers, the landowners, the symbols of your oppression. The violence is brutal, born of years of accumulated pain and degradation. There is no mercy, only the furious desire for retribution. As the rebellion gains momentum, word spreads like wildfire through the marshes. More and more enslaved people abandon their toil, flocking to the banners of the revolt. The sheer numbers are terrifying to your enslavers and empowering to you. You're no longer alone, no longer a faceless unit of labour. You're part of a massive unified force, bound by shared suffering and a common desperate goal: freedom. The Zanj established their own stronghold, a city called Al-Mukhtara, the chosen city, complete with fortifications, administrative structures, and even minting their own coins. This wasn't just a riot. It was an attempt to establish an independent state, a living embodiment of the enslaved people's yearning for self-governance. Imagine the feeling of building something for yourselves, with your own hands, for the first time in your enslaved life. This city, built on the very land you were forced to clear for others, is a powerful symbol of defiance. One mainstream historical fact is the profound impact of the Zanj rebellion on the Abbasid Caliphate, forcing them to divert immense resources and military might to suppress it. The rebellion devastated the agricultural economy of southern Iraq, particularly the rich lands around Basra, and left a lasting scar on the Caliphate's power and stability. It demonstrated that even the most subjugated populations could, when pushed to their limits, pose an existential threat to their oppressors. A quirky or fringe tidbit, amidst the horror, is the Zanj rebels' strategic use of the marshland terrain. They knew the intricate waterways and hidden paths far better than the caliphal armies, who struggled to navigate the unfamiliar disease-ridden swamps. This intimate knowledge of their environment allowed the rebels to wage effective guerrilla warfare, launching surprise attacks and vanishing back into the watery labyrinth, turning their former prison into a formidable fortress. Historians still argue whether the Zanj rebellion's failure was primarily due to the overwhelming military superiority and strategic prowess of the Abbasid forces, or if internal divisions, particularly leadership struggles, and the controversial actions of Ali ibn Muhammad, such as his extreme violence against captured Muslims, contributed significantly to its eventual downfall. The complexity of the rebellion, its long duration, and the diverse motivations of its participants continue to be subjects of scholarly debate. You are now a soldier, fighting not for a master, but for your own survival and liberation. You wield whatever weapons you can find: agricultural tools sharpened into blades, rocks, captured swords. You face the well-trained, heavily armed forces of the Caliphate, often numbering tens of thousands. The battles are brutal, often hand-to-hand, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. You witness unspeakable acts of violence on both sides, the full horror of human conflict unleashed. The rebellion involved massacres, sackings of cities like Basra, and widespread destruction. For years, the Zanj controlled significant territory, disrupting trade routes and terrifying the ruling elite. Their success, however temporary, sent shockwaves through the entire Islamic world, fueling anxieties about similar uprisings elsewhere. The very notion that enslaved people could organise, fight, and even govern themselves was a terrifying prospect for the established order. You recall the family separation you experienced in the slave markets, or even in the fields. Here, in the rebellion, there's a desperate attempt to reunite families, to forge new bonds of community among the freed. The Zanj leader often promised wives and land to his followers, offering a vision of a rebuilt, dignified life free from bondage. This hope for family and community is a powerful motivator, driving you forward through unimaginable hardship. The sleepy ASMR cadence feels almost impossible to maintain when describing the raw, visceral energy of a rebellion. The screams of battle, the crackle of burning towns, the rallying cries of leaders, these are the sounds that define this period of your journey. It is a harsh counterpoint to the quiet suffering you've endured, an explosion of collective pain and rage. The siege of Al-Muhtara by Caliphal forces was long and arduous. You endure starvation, constant bombardment, and disease within the walls. The hope that once sustained you begins to wane as resources dwindle, and the enemy's resolve appears unyielding. The dream of freedom clashes violently with the grim realities of war. Ultimately, after years of intense fighting, the rebellion is crushed. The Abbasid Caliphate, under the leadership of al-Muwaffaq, brought its full military might to bear, employing sophisticated siege tactics and overwhelming numbers. The fall of al-Muhtara is a scene of utter carnage. The remaining rebels, including women and children, are systematically slaughtered. Survivors are re-enslaved, often subjected to even harsher conditions or scattered widely to prevent future uprisings. You might witness the brutal public executions of the Zanj leaders, their heads paraded through the streets of Baghdad as a warning. The message is clear: defiance will not be tolerated, and the system of slavery will reassert its dominance with overwhelming force. The fleeting taste of freedom, so hard won, is cruelly snatched away. The Zanj rebellion is a stark reminder of the depth of human suffering under slavery and the immense courage required to resist. It illustrates the fundamental truth that no human being truly accepts bondage willingly. Even in the face of impossible odds, the yearning for liberty can ignite a fire that threatens to consume empires. But it also highlights the brutal cost of such resistance, the utter ruthlessness of power in crushing any challenge to its established order. You are left with the crushing weight of defeat, the memory of fleeting hope, and the indelible scars of a lost war for freedom. The echoes of the Zanj rebellion, a desperate cry for freedom brutally silenced, still reverberate around you. Now, your journey through the horrors of caliphate slavery turns to the very mechanisms by which such defiance was suppressed and obedience enforced: the punishment regimes. This isn't just about individual acts of cruelty, but a systematic, often elaborate array of tortures and disciplinary measures designed to instill absolute terror and control over the enslaved population. Imagine living under a constant shadow of fear. Every action, every word, every even unspoken thought feels scrutinized. The very air around you seems to hum with the unspoken threat of retribution. Punishment was not just about correcting behavior, it was about public deterrence, about breaking the spirit, and about reminding every enslaved individual of their utter powerlessness and the absolute authority of their owners and the state. The forms of punishment were varied, ranging from physical mutilation to psychological torture, and were often administered with a casual brutality that speaks to the dehumanization inherent in the system. Flogging was perhaps the most common. You would witness, or experience firsthand, the raw, stinging pain of the lash tearing into flesh. The number of blows could vary widely, from a few to dozens, even hundreds, often delivered publicly to maximize their deterrent effect. The screams, the blood, the cries for mercy, these become familiar, horrifying sounds etched into your memory. For more serious offences or acts of defiance, the punishments escalated. You might see individuals branded with hot irons, a permanent mark of their enslaved status and a public declaration of their transgression. This branding was often done on the face or prominent body parts, ensuring constant humiliation and making escape virtually impossible. Imagine the searing pain, the smell of burning flesh, and the lifelong scar, a visible testament to your subjugation. Mutilation was also employed, though perhaps less frequently than flogging or branding. This could include the cutting off of ears, noses, or even limbs, particularly for repeat runaways. The goal was to disfigure, to cripple, to render the enslaved individual less valuable, yet a stark warning to others contemplating escape or rebellion. The psychological impact of witnessing such acts, the knowledge that your body could be arbitrarily defiled, is profoundly traumatizing. One mainstream historical fact is that Islamic law, while regulating aspects of slavery, also explicitly permitted owners to physically discipline their enslaved people, often with broad interpretations of what constituted a permissible punishment. This legal sanction provided a powerful justification for even extreme acts of violence, making it virtually impossible for enslaved individuals to seek legal redress for abuse. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves certain accounts of specialised punishment devices or restraint methods used in various regions, such as heavy iron collars with spikes to prevent sleep, or elaborate shackles designed to inflict maximum discomfort while still allowing limited movement for labour. These grim inventions highlight the ingenuity applied to the very act of torture and control. Historians still argue whether the severity of punishment in the Islamic Caliphates was a direct reflection of inherent cruelty, or if it was primarily a pragmatic response to the challenges of controlling vast, often restive, enslaved populations, especially in labour-intensive sectors. While the latter explains the logic, it does not diminish the immense human suffering involved, leading to a complex debate about intent versus outcome. You remember the vastness of the Zanj rebellion, the collective fury. Punishment regimes were a direct response to such threats, a calculated effort to prevent future uprisings by instilling overwhelming fear. The fear of individual pain was designed to stifle any glimmer of collective defiance. Beyond physical torment, there was also intense psychological abuse. Enslaved individuals were constantly reminded of their inferior status, their lack of rights, their complete dependence on their owners. They might be subjected to public humiliation, forced to wear degrading clothing, or made to perform demeaning tasks. This constant assault on their self-worth was designed to break their spirit, to internalise their subjugation, making them more compliant. The casual nature of the violence is particularly horrifying. An owner could inflict severe punishment for minor infractions, a broken pot, a slow response, a whispered complaint. There was no appeal, no one to intervene. You learn to anticipate moods, to become hyper-aware of your owner's demeanour, trying desperately to avoid drawing their ire. This constant vigilance is exhausting, a never-ending state of anxiety. Sometimes, punishment involved extreme deprivation, withholding food or water for extended periods, or forcing enslaved individuals to stand or sit in painful positions for hours. These methods were designed to inflict suffering without leaving overt physical marks, yet they were profoundly damaging to both body and mind. You recall the thirst from the trans-Saharan journey. Here, it is not a natural adversary but a deliberate weapon. The isolation inflicted through punishment could be profound. An enslaved person might be confined to a dark, solitary space for days or weeks, cut off from all human contact. This sensory deprivation, combined with the fear of the unknown, could be psychologically devastating, leading to breakdown or madness. You see the scars on others, silent testimonials to their past transgressions, or simply the arbitrary cruelty of their masters. These marks are not just physical, they are social. They identify the individual as someone who has been disciplined, further cementing their marginalised status within the enslaved hierarchy and among the free population. The use of sexual violence as a form of punishment, especially for enslaved women, was also a grim reality, intertwining with the broader issue of sexual exploitation. Resistance to sexual demands could result in beatings or other forms of physical abuse, making the threat of such violence a constant instrument of control. Even for those enslaved people who held positions of greater responsibility, like Mamluks or eunuchs, punishment for disobedience or disloyalty could be swift and brutal, including blinding, imprisonment, or execution. Their elevated status offered no ultimate shield against the absolute power of the caliph or sultan. You remember the training of the Mamluks, the physical rigour. This was simply another, more extreme form of that same discipline. The absence of any formal justice system for enslaved people, where their testimony held little to no weight against a free person, meant that abuses largely went unchecked. Owners were almost entirely immune from legal repercussions for actions against their own enslaved people, reinforcing the idea that enslaved individuals were mere property, not subjects deserving of legal protection. This pervasive atmosphere of fear and the constant threat of pain worked to create a culture of compliance. You learn to obey, to anticipate, to suppress your own will. The spirit of defiance, which briefly ignited in the Zanj rebellion, is systematically extinguished through the brutal machinery of punishment. Your humanity is slowly eroded, replaced by a deep-seated instinct for survival, a constant vigilance against the next lash, the next humiliation. The very air seems to carry the ghost of suffering, the unspoken fears of those around you. You look back at the relative comfort of the harem or even the physical exertion of public works, and you realise that every horror you've endured was underpinned by this fundamental threat of overwhelming arbitrary violence. The punishment regimes were the invisible chains that bound you, a chilling testament to the ingenuity of human cruelty. Having witnessed the brutal efficiency of punishment regimes and the devastating consequences of failed rebellion, your journey through the Caliphate's dark history of slavery now brings you to one of its most emotionally shattering aspects: family separation. This is not a physical torment, but a profound, enduring wound to the soul, tearing apart the most fundamental human bonds and leaving behind a lifetime of grief and longing. Imagine the moment, a memory you carry with chilling clarity from the slave market in Section 3, when you first saw children torn from their mothers, spouses dragged away from each other. That initial shock, however, becomes a recurring nightmare for many enslaved individuals. The system of slavery, by its very nature, treated human beings as commodities, and familial ties were often seen as liabilities rather than sacred bonds. Your family, if you managed to have one or keep vestiges of it, was never truly secure. The fear of separation was a constant gnawing anxiety. You might be working alongside your child or spouse in the fields, or serving in the same household, always with the knowledge that at any moment, a sale, a transfer, or an owner's whim could rip them away from you forever. This perpetual uncertainty makes it agonizingly difficult to form deep attachments, yet the human need for connection is so strong that you cling to whatever familial bonds you can forge, knowing they are fragile threads easily broken. The reasons for separation were varied and often cold-heartedly pragmatic. An owner might need to raise funds, and selling a child or a spouse was a quick way to acquire cash. A master might die, and his enslaved property, including families, would be divided among heirs, scattering them across different households or even different cities. Sometimes enslaved individuals were simply gifted, as we touched upon in Section 4, to another person, without any consideration for their familial connections. Each transaction was a knife to the heart, severing ties with no regard for the profound emotional suffering it caused. You witnessed these separations, or experienced them firsthand. The desperate cries of a mother watching her child being led away, perhaps never to be seen again. The silent, agonizing grief of a husband whose wife is sold to a distant land. These scenes are etched into your memory, a constant reminder of your powerlessness. There is no appeal, no legal recourse, no compassion from those who orchestrate these severances. The pain is absolute, immediate, and utterly devastating. One mainstream historical fact is that despite some theoretical Islamic legal injunctions, encouraging kindness towards enslaved individuals, and discouraging the separation of young children from their mothers, the widespread practice of buying and selling enslaved people from diverse sources across vast distances inherently led to frequent and brutal family separations. Economic necessity and owners' rights often superseded any humanitarian considerations in practice. A quirky or fringe tidbit, a grim reflection of the commodification, is that sometimes enslaved women with desirable skills such as wet nursing would be separated from their own infants and forced to nurse the children of their owners. This not only ensured the owner's child was well fed, but also contributed to the death or ill health of the enslaved mother's own child due to neglect or lack of nourishment. It's a chilling example of the extreme ends to which the system would go to extract value. Historians still argue whether the practice of recognizing children of enslaved mothers and free fathers as legitimate, the unwind status, and the potential for these mothers to gain manumission upon their master's death truly mitigated the overall trauma of family separation within the system. While it offered a unique pathway to freedom for some, it was still a system built on forced sexual relationships and the constant threat of familial rupture for all other enslaved individuals, including those who were full siblings but had different fathers. The psychological impact of family separation is profound and long-lasting. It fosters a deep sense of loss, grief, and often an inability to form new emotional attachments, fearing the inevitable pain of another severing. You might spend years, even a lifetime, haunted by the faces of those you lost, wondering about their fate, hoping against hope for a reunion that rarely comes. The memories become bittersweet, cherished and agonizing at the same time. You recall that sense of shared suffering with fellow captives on the trans-Saharan march, a fleeting camaraderie that eased the journey. Here, the sorrow of separation is deeply personal, often isolating. While others might empathise, no one can truly fill the void left by a lost child or spouse. This is a burden you carry alone, silently. For children, being separated from their parents at a young age is particularly traumatic. They lose their primary caregivers, their protectors, and their link to their past and identity. They might be raised in a new household with little or no memory of their origins, their entire sense of self shaped by their enslaved status. The emotional and developmental scars are immense. The act of naming, which we discussed earlier, becomes doubly poignant here. A new name further separates you from your kin, from the family name that defined your lineage. Your true name, the one whispered in the dark, becomes a desperate link to a past that is systematically erased, a silent defiance against utter obliteration. The very concept of a family among enslaved people often had to be reformed under incredible duress. New partners, new siblings by circumstance, new bonds created out of shared misery. These new families, however, were always fragile, susceptible to the same forces of separation that destroyed the original ones. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit's need for connection, even in the face of constant rupture. The gentle sarcasm of the narrator would feel utterly inappropriate here. There is nothing to joke about, no wry observation that can soften the profound, gut-wrenching pain of losing your loved ones to the machinery of slavery. It is raw, unadulterated heartbreak, a silent scream that echoes through the generations. Consider the ripple effect of these separations. Not only did they traumatize individuals, but they also systematically dismantle the social structures and cultural continuity of the enslaved populations. Without stable family units, it became harder to pass down traditions, languages, and histories, contributing to the broader process of cultural eradication. You cling to small tokens, a worn piece of fabric, a remembered lullaby, a fragment of a story, anything that connects you to those who were taken. These small private acts of remembrance become vital, a desperate effort to keep the memory of your true family alive, even as the world around you demands you forget. The owners, for their part, rarely considered the emotional impact of their decisions. To them, enslaved individuals were assets, and their movements were dictated by economic calculation or personal convenience. The tears and pleas of the enslaved were often dismissed as mere sentimentality, a distraction from the business of managing property. This callous indifference is perhaps as cruel as the act of separation itself. This tearing apart of families is one of the most agonizing and enduring legacies of slavery. It leaves behind a generational trauma, a profound rupture in the fabric of human connection. Your heart aches not just for your own loss, but for the countless others who endured the same shattering experience. It is a horror that transcends physical pain, etching itself onto the very soul, a wound that never truly heals. Having witnessed the soul-shattering trauma of family separation, your journey into the darker aspects of Islamic Caliphate slavery now confronts an intellectual and moral horror, the religious justification. This isn't about the physical lash or the clink of chains, but about the profound, insidious way in which sacred texts and scholarly interpretations were twisted, adapted, and utilized to legitimize the brutal institution of slavery, offering it a divine sanction that was incredibly difficult to challenge. Imagine sitting, perhaps in a quiet moment in your enforced servitude, overhearing snippets of conversation, or being directly addressed by your owner or a religious scholar visiting the household. You might hear verses from the Quran recited, or interpretations of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings, hadith, being expounded, all seemingly designed to explain why you are in chains. This intellectual framework, presented as divine will, is perhaps one of the most psychologically damaging forms of control, aiming to convince you and society that your enslavement is not merely permissible, but part of a God-ordained order. The core of this justification often rested on the concept of jihad, or holy struggle. Captives taken during legitimate warfare against non-Muslim enemies, kuffar or polytheists, were considered permissible to enslave. The argument posited that these individuals, by resisting Islamic rule or faith, had forfeited their freedom and could be taken as war booty. This provided a seemingly endless supply of enslaved people from the expanding frontiers of the Caliphate, as well as from ongoing conflicts. The horror here is the transformation of religious doctrine into a license for human trafficking. Furthermore, existing pre-Islamic practices of slavery were not abolished by Islam but regulated and integrated. While Islam introduced certain reforms, such as encouraging kindness to enslaved people, setting conditions for manumission, and prohibiting the enslavement of free Muslims, though this rule was often bent in practice, it did not abolish the institution itself. Instead, it provided a detailed legal framework, or fiqh, for how slavery should be managed, bought, sold, and inherited. This legal codification, derived from religious sources, solidified slavery as a legitimate social and economic institution. You might hear discussions about the rights and duties of owners and enslaved people. For instance, an owner had the right to the labour and services of their enslaved person, and in the case of women, sexual access. The enslaved person's duty was obedience and loyalty. While the text might mention treating enslaved people with kindness, these were often moral exhortations rather than legally enforceable rights from the perspective of the enslaved. The subtle shift from moral encouragement to legal permission is where much of the insidious justification lay. One mainstream historical fact is that Islamic jurisprudence, developed over centuries, provided a comprehensive legal framework for slavery, detailing everything from permissible methods of acquisition to rules of sale, inheritance, and manumission. This detailed legal system, drawing from the Quran and Hadith, allowed slavery to persist as a fundamental, institutionally sanctioned practice across the Islamic world for over a millennium. A quirky or fringe tidbit, which highlights the complex interpretations, is the concept of muktaba, a contract where an enslaved person could buy their freedom from their master over time. While seemingly progressive, its application was rare and dependent entirely on the master's willingness and the enslaved person's ability to earn and save, often under extremely difficult circumstances. It existed in theory more than widespread practice for many. Historians still argue whether the internal contradictions within Islamic texts, encouraging manumission and kindness, while simultaneously sanctioning enslavement, ultimately served to prolong or mitigate the horrors of slavery. Some argue that the potential for manumission and the moral injunctions offered a path to amelioration, while others contend that these served to morally legitimize the institution, making it harder to challenge its fundamental injustice. You're constantly reminded of your place within this divinely sanctioned hierarchy. You're told that your suffering is perhaps a test, or simply your fate. This religious framing attempts to strip away your will to resist, to make you accept your condition as immutable. It's a psychological weapon, far more potent than any whip, aiming to conquer your mind and spirit by appealing to faith itself. The concept of dhimmi status, granted to people of the book, Jews and Christians, who submitted to Islamic rule, offered them protection and freedom from enslavement, provided they paid a special tax, jizya. However, polytheists, or those deemed outside this protected status, remain targets for enslavement. This distinction often shaped the patterns of the slave trade, making certain populations more vulnerable than others based on religious identity. The discussions around religious justification often involved complex theological debates, far beyond your understanding as a subjugated person. Yet, the outcome of these debates directly impacted your life, providing the moral and legal underpinning for your perpetual bondage. You remember the Zanj rebellion. Even their leader, Ali ibn Muhammad, used a form of religious appeal, albeit an anti-establishment one, to rally his followers, showing the pervasive influence of religious rhetoric. The subtle sarcasm from the narrator you're used to feels particularly jarring when discussing how religion, meant to elevate humanity, was twisted to justify its lowest degradation. There is a profound irony in sacred words being used to sanction profound cruelty. It's a reminder of how power can corrupt even the noblest of intentions. The religious justification extended to even the most personal aspects of slavery, such as the sexual exploitation of enslaved women. The permissibility of concubinage was rooted in specific interpretations of Islamic law, framing such relationships not as rape or coercion, but as legal entitlements of the master over his property. This provided a powerful shield against any moral questioning of these deeply violating practices. The existence of numerous scholars who wrote extensively on the intricacies of slavery, from the types of enslaved people to their management and permissible punishments, further cemented its place within Islamic society as a legitimate and thoroughly understood institution. These scholarly works, far from condemning slavery, often served to codify and regulate it, lending it intellectual weight and respectability. You're made to understand that your conversion to Islam, while desirable, does not automatically grant you freedom. While some legal schools and individual practices encouraged manumission upon conversion, it was by no means universal or automatic. You could remain enslaved even as a Muslim, serving a Muslim master, a constant reminder of the socio-economic reality overriding purely religious ideals of equality. This blending of religious authority with the practice of slavery created a formidable barrier to its abolition. To challenge slavery was not just to challenge an economic system, it was to challenge a system seemingly sanctioned by divine decree, a daunting prospect for any reformer within that historical context. The ingrained nature of this belief made resistance all the more difficult. Your life, therefore, is not just one of physical hardship, but also of spiritual and intellectual subjugation. You're told, explicitly or implicitly, that your condition is part of a larger, unquestionable divine plan. This religious layering of your misery adds a profound weight, making your chains feel not merely physical but spiritual. It is the ultimate form of control, attempting to colonize your very soul. Having grappled with the insidious religious justifications for your bondage, your journey now turns to a glimmer, however faint and conditional, of hope. Manumission's glimmer. This is the rare, often complex and always conditional path to freedom within the Islamic Caliphates. It wasn't a universal right or an easy escape, but for a fortunate few it offered a tantalizing, often precarious route out of perpetual servitude. Imagine the whispered stories among fellow enslaved individuals, tales of someone who was freed. These stories, often embellished, become a lifeline, a desperate hope to cling to amidst the endless toil and suffering. Manumission, or ITQ in Arabic, was indeed encouraged as a pious act in Islam, often presented as a way for masters to gain spiritual reward. This religious encouragement, however, did not translate into a widespread or automatic release for the vast majority of enslaved people. The most common path to manumission was through the will of the master. An owner could, at any point, simply declare an enslaved person free. This act was often driven by religious piety, particularly during times of illness, old age, or as a form of atonement. However, it was entirely at the master's discretion, and could be revoked if the master changed their mind before the formal declaration. You're completely dependent on the goodwill, capriciousness, or religious conviction of your owner. This arbitrary nature means that the dream of freedom constantly hangs by a thread. Another significant path, particularly for enslaved women, was becoming an walad, or mother of a child. If an enslaved woman bore a child to her male owner, and he acknowledged the child as his own, she gained a special status. She could not be sold, and upon her master's death she automatically became free. Her children, as we discussed, were typically born free. This offered a clear, albeit often forced and traumatic, route to freedom for some women and their progeny. However, it did not apply to children born to enslaved fathers and mothers who were not their owners, nor to women who did not bear children to their masters. You recall the immense trauma of sexual exploitation from Section 11. The walad status, while a path to freedom, was fundamentally predicated on forced sexual relations. It highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of Islamic slavery, a system that offered avenues for freedom stemming from acts of profound violation. This inherent paradox meant that freedom for these women was inextricably linked to their previous exploitation. For some, manumission could be achieved through a contract of muktaba or kitaba, where an enslaved person agreed to purchase their freedom for a fixed sum, often paid in installments over a period of time. This required the master's agreement and the enslaved person's ability to earn money. While it sounds like a self-emancipation clause, in reality, enslaved individuals had little opportunity to earn and save. Any earnings typically belonged to the master, making such contracts incredibly difficult to fulfill. It was a theoretical path to freedom for many, rarely a practical one. One mainstream historical fact is that manumission was a consistent feature of Islamic societies, resulting in a significant population of freed men and freed women throughout history. These freed individuals often maintained ties of loyalty and patronage with their former masters, forming a unique social class that sometimes achieved wealth and influence, particularly in early Islamic history. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to the concept of wala, a client-patron relationship that persisted after manumission. Freed individuals often retained a strong social and legal connection to their former owners, acting as clients or dependents. This meant that while legally free, their independence was often circumscribed by continued obligations or allegiance to their former master's family. Imagine being free, but still fundamentally linked to the very people who once owned you, a lingering echo of your past bondage. Historians still argue whether the religious encouragement for manumission truly led to a significant overall reduction in the enslaved population over time, or if the constant influx of new captives from warfare and trade consistently outpaced the rate of manumission, ensuring the perpetuation of the institution on a grand scale. The debate highlights the tension between the ethical ideals and the economic realities of the caliphate. Manumission was also often a reward for exceptional service, particularly for Mamluks and eunuchs who demonstrated extraordinary loyalty, military prowess, or administrative skill. A Mamluk general might be freed after years of distinguished service, or a trusted eunuch after decades of managing a caliph's household. This was an incentive, a powerful motivator for obedience and excellence. But it was also a limited path, available only to a select few who had already endured intense training and servitude. You recall the sheer brutality of the Mamluk training, the physical toll, the emotional isolation. The promise of freedom, however distant, was perhaps the only thing that made such a life bearable for some. But even then, freedom meant being cut off from the only family you knew, your fellow Mamluks, and facing an uncertain future in a society that still viewed you through the lens of your former enslaved status. The act of manumission itself was often a formal, public ceremony, witnessed by religious scholars or judges. This official recognition was crucial for the freed person to gain legal rights, to marry, inherit, and own property, and to fully integrate into free society. It was a moment of profound transformation, a symbolic shedding of the chains, even if emotional scars lingered. However, freedom did not guarantee an easy life. Freed individuals often face social prejudice, economic hardship, and the challenges of building a new life with limited resources or connections beyond their former master's patronage. You might find yourself struggling to find work, to secure a place in society, always carrying the stigma of your past. The world outside your servitude, though free, was not always welcoming. You look back at the horrifying chain of events: capture, desert march, market, the daily grind, the trauma of sexual exploitation, the fury of rebellion, the pain of punishment, the shattering of family. Manumission, in this context, feels like a faint star in an otherwise boundless night, a tiny light that is tantalizingly close for some, yet remains out of reach for countless others. The sleepy ASMR cadence might soften the harsher edges of these realities, but it cannot diminish the inherent injustice. The fact that freedom was a privilege, granted at the discretion of the powerful, rather than an inherent right, underscores the fundamental inhumanity of the system. For those who were never manumitted, the glimmer was a cruel mirage, a constant reminder of what they lacked. They continued to toil, to suffer, to face the daily indignities of their bondage, knowing that the possibility of freedom, however remote, was not for them. Their dreams of liberty remained unfulfilled, buried under the weight of their perpetual servitude. The legacy of manumission is complex. While it offered individual escape, it also served as a mechanism to perpetuate the system by showing that good enslaved people could be rewarded, thus potentially discouraging broader resistance or abolitionist movements. It was a safety valve, allowing the system to continue by releasing small amounts of pressure, rather than dismantling the entire structure. You might carry the profound scars of your past even after manumission. The memories of lost family, the physical pains, the psychological trauma, these are not erased by a declaration of freedom. You are a survivor, yes, but one forever marked by the indelible stain of enslavement. The glimmer of manumission, while precious, illuminates the vast darkness of what came before and the lingering shadows that follow. You've glimpsed the tantalizing yet often elusive glimmer of manumission, a conditional freedom. Now, your journey into the profound horrors of caliphate slavery turns to something even more fundamental and insidious: the deliberate and systematic destruction of identity, the cultural eradication. This isn't about physical pain, though it's often a consequence of it. It's about the relentless assault on your very sense of self, your heritage, your language, and your ancestral memory. Imagine being stripped bare, not just of your clothes, but of everything that defines who you are. From the moment of capture, as you remember from Section 1, the process begins. Your name, a fundamental link to your family and lineage, is often immediately changed. You are given a new Arabic or Turkic name, chosen by your captors or owners. This seemingly simple act is a powerful tool of dehumanization, aiming to sever your connection to your past and force you into a new, imposed identity. You might cling to your true name, whispering it to yourself in the dark, a secret act of rebellion against this erasure. Your native language, the sounds of your childhood, the tongue of your ancestors, these are discouraged, often brutally suppressed. You are forced to learn Arabic, the language of your masters, the language of the Quran, the language of commerce and command. Any attempt to speak your old tongue might be met with swift punishment, a clear message that your past is irrelevant and unwelcome. The loss of language is not just a loss of words, it's a loss of oral traditions, stories, jokes, and the very cultural fabric that binds communities together. You feel yourself losing grip on your heritage, piece by painful piece. Your religious beliefs, if they were not Islamic, are also targeted for eradication. While forced conversion was generally discouraged in principle within Islam, the social and practical pressures on enslaved individuals to adopt the religion of their masters were immense. You might be compelled to attend religious instruction, to learn prayers, and to participate in Islamic rituals. The alternative could be continued social ostracization, harsher treatment, or even the denial of opportunities for manumission. This forced assimilation aims to erase your spiritual identity, replacing it with one that aligns with the dominant power structure. Your traditional customs, your ancestral practices, the way you celebrated, grieved, or simply lived, these are systematically dismantled. You're expected to conform to the norms and expectations of your owner's household or the broader society. There is no space for your own cultural expression, no allowance for your unique heritage. You are absorbed into a foreign world, expected to forget where you came from, to forget who you were. This constant suppression of your cultural identity leaves you feeling adrift, unmoored from your roots. One mainstream historical fact is that the process of cultural assimilation and linguistic conversion was a significant feature of slavery in the Islamic world, particularly for those brought from non-Islamic lands. Enslaved individuals, over generations, often adopted Arabic as their primary language and Islam as their religion, contributing to the broader Islamization and Arabization of various regions. This wasn't always a benign process, but often occurred under duress and systematic pressure. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the occasional phenomenon of reverse cultural influence, where certain aspects of the enslaved people's original cultures, like specific culinary traditions, musical forms, or even folk stories, would subtly seep into the dominant culture, though often without explicit acknowledgement of their origin. It's a tiny, almost imperceptible act of cultural resilience, a whisper of what was lost. Historians still argue whether the relative openness of Islamic societies to cultural assimilation, e.g., Arabicizing names, conversion to Islam, represented a softer form of slavery compared to systems where cultural difference was rigidly maintained to reinforce racial hierarchy. While assimilation might have offered some paths to social integration for individuals, it simultaneously facilitated the widespread eradication of diverse cultures and identities over generations, a profound and systemic loss. You recall the Zanj Rebellion, a desperate attempt to reclaim agency and, in a sense, cultural self-determination against a system that sought to obliterate their origins. The crushing of that rebellion also represented a triumph of the forces of cultural eradication, ensuring that the dominant narrative and way of life would prevail. The lack of stable family units, as we explored in Section 14, further exacerbates this cultural loss. With parents separated from children and extended family networks fragmented, the traditional means of transmitting culture, language, and history from one generation to the next are severely disrupted. The elders, who hold the communal memory, are isolated or perish, and their knowledge dies with them. The very concept of a shared history is denied to you. Your past, if spoken of at all, is often framed as one of ignorance or darkness before the enlightenment of Islam. Your origins are depicted as barbarian, uncivilized, further justifying your enslavement and the necessity of your assimilation. This narrative actively invalidates your heritage, compelling you to internalize a sense of inferiority. Imagine the psychological toll of this constant erasure. Your memories of home, of your people, begin to fade, becoming less distinct, like dreams slipping away with the dawn. You struggle to remember faces, voices, the details of a life that feels increasingly distant. This forced forgetting is a profound anguish, a tearing at the very fabric of your being. The contrast between the outward prosperity and sophistication of the Caliphate, with its grand public works and intellectual achievements, and the hidden cultural devastation wrought by its reliance on slavery is stark. The beautiful mosques and bustling markets are built upon a foundation of annihilated identities. Sometimes, enslaved individuals might try to secretly preserve elements of their culture, a whispered song, a hidden prayer, a shared word in their native tongue. These acts, however small, are acts of courageous defiance, vital for maintaining a shred of their original identity in a world determined to erase it. You cling to these fragments, these whispers from your past, as proof that you once were, and still are, more than just a slave. The children born into slavery, unlike you, have no memory of a free life, no direct link to their ancestral lands or cultures. They are born into this erased reality, their identities shaped entirely by their enslaved status and the dominant culture around them. For them, the loss is not just a painful memory, but an inherited absence, a void where their heritage should be. The sleepy ASMR cadence feels particularly unsettling when describing this slow, systemic death of identity. It's not a sudden, loud horror, but a quiet, constant erosion, a chilling testament to the power of cultural suppression. This process of cultural eradication is not merely a byproduct of slavery, it is a fundamental aspect of it. By stripping enslaved individuals of their heritage, their language, and their self-identity, the system aimed to make them more pliable, more obedient, and less likely to resist. It was a calculated strategy to ensure control by destroying the very essence of personhood. The scars of this loss extend far beyond your individual life, impacting generations to come, leaving a lingering void in the tapestry of human history. You've witnessed the systematic erasure of identity, the relentless assault on language, and the profound loss of cultural memory. Now, as our journey through these horrifying acts draws to a close, we confront the legacy of chains, the enduring insidious impact of slavery that reverberates far beyond the historical period, leaving indelible trauma on individuals, societies, and the very fabric of human history. This isn't just about what happened, it's about what continues to echo, a haunting reminder of unchecked power and profound human suffering. Imagine looking back at the long, agonizing path you've travelled, the brutal capture, the endless desert march, the dehumanizing spectacle of the slave market, the subtle cruelties of domestic servitude, the gilded cage of the harem, the irreversible mutilation of eunuch making, the forging in the fires of Mamluk training, the back-breaking toil of agricultural fields and suffocating mines, the monumental yet deadly public works, the profound violation of sexual exploitation, the desperate fury of rebellion, the terror of punishment, and the shattering pain of family separation, culminating in the systematic eradication of culture. Each step has left an indelible mark, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. The most immediate legacy, for you as an individual who has survived this, is the pervasive and lifelong trauma. Even if you were among the fortunate few to gain manumission, as we discussed in section 16, the scars remain. Physical ailments from years of malnutrition, overwork, and abuse persist. Chronic pain, debilitating illnesses, and disfigurement are constant reminders of your past. But perhaps even more profound are the psychological wounds. Deep-seated fear, anxiety, depression, a pervasive sense of powerlessness, and an inability to truly trust. The constant hypervigilance, the suppressed emotions, the internalized degradation, these do not vanish with a declaration of freedom. They become an enduring part of who you are, shaping your interactions, your perceptions, and your outlook on life. You carry the weight of your chains, long after they've been removed. For generations, the legacy of slavery manifested as social stigma and prejudice. Even freed individuals and their descendants often faced discrimination in marriage, employment, and social acceptance. They might have been viewed as inherently inferior, their past servitude casting a long shadow over their future. This persistent prejudice created a distinct social hierarchy, where the taint of enslaved ancestry could limit opportunities and perpetuate marginalization for centuries. You remember that sense of not truly belonging, even if legally free. That feeling often persisted for descendants. Economically, the legacy of chains contributed to profound disparities and underdevelopment in regions from which enslaved people were taken. The systematic extraction of human capital, the forced removal of millions of productive individuals, decimated populations, disrupted social structures, and robbed communities of their future. Conversely, the societies that benefited from enslaved labour often built immense wealth and infrastructure upon this foundation, creating a lasting economic advantage that had its roots in exploitation. The opulent palaces, the bustling markets, the vast agricultural lands, all carry the invisible cost of human suffering. The fragmentation of families and communities due to slavery, as explored in Section 14, left deep and lasting wounds. Lineages were broken, oral histories lost, and the very fabric of communal life was torn apart. The ripple effects of this extend across generations, making it difficult for descendants to trace their ancestry or connect with their cultural roots, leaving a void where a rich heritage should be. You remember the poignant memory of that crocodile dung sunscreen from your earlier, free life, an almost whimsical detail now, representing a connection to a past that for many was systematically annihilated. Culturally, the legacy is complex. While some cultures were largely eradicated through the systematic process of cultural eradication, Section 17, others absorbed elements from the enslaved populations, creating new cultural forms. However, this often occurred in a context of power imbalance, where the contributions of the enslaved were rarely acknowledged or celebrated. The very historical narratives often silence the voices of the enslaved, focusing instead on the achievements of the enslavers, perpetuating a distorted view of the past. Historians still argue whether the enduring social and economic inequalities observed in many post-slavery societies across the Middle East and North Africa can be directly attributed to the long-term impact of the institution of slavery, or if other historical factors played a more significant role. This complex debate seeks to unravel the deep-seated roots of contemporary challenges, linking the past to the present in nuanced ways. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this enduring legacy is the demographic impact. Millions of people were forcibly relocated across vast distances, fundamentally reshaping the ethnic and cultural landscapes of regions from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. The descendants of these enslaved individuals are present in societies today, often as marginalised groups, a living testament to the historical slave trade. A quirky or fringe tidbit, yet one that is profoundly poignant, is the survival of certain specific linguistic phrases, musical rhythms, or even culinary practices among descendants of enslaved communities, sometimes thousands of miles from their ancestral homes. These small, fragmented echoes serve as powerful, albeit often unrecognised, testaments to the resilience of human culture and memory against systematic attempts at eradication. Imagine a specific spice blend, or a particular drumbeat, carrying within it the ghost of a lost homeland. The moral and ethical legacy is perhaps the most difficult to grapple with. The institutionalization of slavery, buttressed by religious and legal justifications, created a profound moral blind spot within societies for centuries. It normalized the idea of one human owning another, of perpetual bondage, and of the casual exercise of extreme power. This moral failing, this dehumanization of vast segments of humanity, left a deep stain on the conscience of the societies that perpetuated it, and continues to challenge contemporary ethical frameworks. The echoes of the Zanj Rebellion, Section 12, though ultimately crushed, served as a potent, albeit terrifying reminder, to the ruling powers of the inherent human desire for freedom. It also left a legacy of fear among the elites, influencing policies and systems of control for centuries to come, reinforcing the brutal punishment regimes, Section 13, you experienced. Even today, the terminology and stereotypes associated with historical slavery can subtly persist, affecting social perceptions and contributing to systemic biases. The language, the historical narratives, the very way we talk about the past can perpetuate the dehumanization that was at the core of the institution. Your journey through these experiences has been harrowing, a glimpse into the darkest chapters of human history. You've felt the pain, the fear, the indignity, the profound loss. The sleepy ASMR cadence might have gently guided you through the narrative, but it cannot mask the severity of what was described. It served perhaps to allow these difficult truths to settle, to penetrate your consciousness without overwhelming you, like a soft filter over a harsh reality. The legacy of chains is not merely historical, it is a living reality. It resides in the unresolved traumas, the persistent inequalities, the ongoing struggles for justice and recognition. It reminds us of the profound responsibility we have to confront the uncomfortable truths of our past, to acknowledge the immense suffering, and to ensure that such acts of dehumanization are never again sanctioned or tolerated. The weight of this history is heavy, a silent burden carried by generations, a stark warning from the past to the present. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey is over. The chains have faded, the cries silenced, and the desert winds have smoothed over the tracks of countless weary feet. Yet the echoes of their suffering, the whispers of their lost names, linger in the quiet spaces of history, urging us to remember. As you drift into sleep, let the knowledge of these enduring human spirits, who found resilience even in the darkest corners of despair, bring a strange, quiet peace. Rest now under the vast indifferent sky, knowing that the stories of the past, however painful, hold lessons for the future.